Alright, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Good morning all, and thank you for coming out to CyberOU's first annual Cyber Summit here at Oakland University. I'm Trip Kotlajewski, CyberOU's Vice President, and I'll be your EMC for the morning. CyberOU is Oakland University's cybersecurity club. Since April 2013, less than 1 year ago, we have grown to over 200 members and hosted over 20 events. We're devoted to 3 principles. 1, education. We don't learn to hack, we hack to learn. We hack in order to learn how to defend against attacks. 2, service. We want to make the digital world a safer place and build relationships that will last past graduation. 3, enjoyment. Security can be fun. I would like to take the time to thank all the people who helped make this event possible and our honored guests. When your name is called, please stand. Dean Chamra, Dean Smith, Jane Dietrich, Peggy Chu, Charlotte Allen, Vera Smith, Dr. Fu, George Corser, Flavius Papin, Arnold Crother, Eric Mall, R.J. Fisher, Zach Rouse, Dr. Dada Shadza, Weston Labs, and Zandy. First, it is my distinct honor to introduce our first speaker, Michigan's Chief Security Officer, Dan Lorman. Dan Lorman is an internationally recognized security leader, technologist, and author. He is best known for his refreshingly practical commentary on technology and clear advice on computer security and ethics for home and work. Over the past 25 years, he has served public and private sector organizations which span the globe in a diverse set of technology and security leadership roles. He currently serves as Chief Security Officer over both physical and cybersecurity in Michigan government. He is also a global conference speaker on many security and technology topics, and he has been a keynote speaker at conferences from South Africa to Moscow and all over the United States. Lorman has received numerous professional awards, including CSO of the Year, Public Official of the Year, and Computer World Premier 100 Leader. As Michigan CSO and Deputy Director for Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection, he leads the Michigan Cyber Initiative, which was launched by Governor Snyder at the 2011 Michigan Cyber Summit. He is also a lead on several federal Department of Homeland Security committees and the National Governors Association's efforts in cybersecurity. Dan began his career as a computer system analyst at the NSA and served in England for 7 years in a variety of private sector leadership roles. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Lorman.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate that, and really appreciate you all being here, this invitation. It's really an honor. I think it's awesome what you've done here at Oakland. I really think this is a fantastic event, and really, I know Rod will say the same thing, but we're really, really glad to be here. I want to just say one thing before we really get going into this presentation, and that is, Chipko mentioned one of the goals of this is to have fun. So I just want to start just in the beginning. How many of you are Grizzly fan, Oakland basketball Grizzly fans? Anybody? A few? Oh, yeah, I expected a few hands to go up. So I will tell you that we'll be rooting for you tonight in Wright State. Playing in Green Bay, play Wright State. But I have to tell you, I will be rooting for another team. I hope they meet in the finals of the Horizon League tournament. And that is Valpo. I know boo. Yeah, I expected some boos. I had to say this though because I am a Valpo grad, computer science, and I've come Oakland. When I come over here from Lansing, I typically come when Valpo plays Oakland. There's a lot of history in the Mid-Continent Conference and the Horizon League Conference, and both teams, great teams, last-second shots, and I love basketball, and I love Oakland University, and I root for you tonight, but I also love my alma mater, Valpo. So I had to throw that in there. I couldn't resist. So what I want to do in the next 20 minutes, and I'm going to be very quick. I'm going to talk fast. Obviously, there's a lot to say on this topic. I'm going to very quickly give you maybe 10 minutes on the state of things from a federal, national, state government perspective, and then take the last 10 minutes. I was asked to talk about universities and maybe some ideas that I've seen around best practices and what universities can be doing in cybersecurity. So, many of you have seen the headlines, and they're all over, back up a second there. all over the place. Every day you seem to see another headline around somebody's getting hacked. Local government, state government. Adobe hacks 3 million accounts. Of course, we all know about Target. How many of you shop at Target? Yeah, so yeah, a lot of you. We just talked about this earlier this week with our team. How many of you got new credit cards with your? Yeah, okay, a few of you. Probably a good idea. Target headlines: J.P. Morgan Chase, job database, U.S.-Iran. Cybercrime is greatest global threat to organizations today in London Times. And then this one I really want to talk about for a second. Janet Napolitano, in her exiting speech, the Homeland Security Director, last September before she went to California to head their university system in California, said that a major incident of the scale of 9/11 or possibly Pearl Harbor is inevitable in the United States. Now, whether you believe that or not, and maybe some of you may think that's doom or gloom, some of you may think that's not going to happen, maybe some of you think it will happen, it's inevitable. The reality is when the Secretary of Homeland Security says that at the National Press Club, I think we need to pay attention. And so, interesting speech. Get a chance, go out, you can see it on YouTube, watch the speech, just listen to the words. Because clearly we're in a new time, a new world. The kinds of things going on are fascinating and certainly need a lot of attention. In the state of Michigan, we are constantly being attacked. I'm not going to go through all of these numbers, but each and every day as I'm standing here, there are people trying to break into our networks. There are people trying all different types of ways, both from an insider threat perspective, external perspective, web-based attacks, you name it. And you in this room probably know very well the kinds of things that are being thrown at us, as are just about every organization in the world. So certainly this is something that is a high priority. And as we see more and more of a push towards e-government, and more online, not in line, which is 10 to 15 years old, that phrase, but it's becoming more and more reality, that people want to do things 7/24, 365. They want to always have access to the latest, whatever they need to do, both within government and the private sector. You're going to see more and more attacks. And so certainly we see around 520,000 cyber attacks each and every day. Very quickly, and Rod's going to probably talk about the networks and where we're going with some of our architecture after me, but I just want to mention briefly, what kind of scope are you talking about with the state? We were around 55,000 state employees back about a decade ago. We're at about 48,000 today, 800 critical apps, 64,000 devices, so fairly large enterprise. And if you look at what we do, so what is government involved in? Most of you probably know these things: register to vote, taxes, benefits, business, report a crime, look for a job, renew a license, win the lottery, compare schools, plan a trip. We're in all of those things. So government really touches a wide part of our lives. Some of you may feel like you wish more of that was done by the private sector, and maybe in the future it will be. But the reality is you rely on us. We are, in a sense, your sole source provider. There's nobody else that issues you a driver's license. So we need to make sure that that data is protected. So as we think about this topic, I want to just say right off the top that, Governor Snyder gets it. And I don't just say that as, I've been a part of the Granholm administration, the Engler administration, and now the Snyder administration. He comes from a background of Gateway Computers, CEO, very much in the startup community, and just really understands this and is pushing this and driving this nationwide amongst the governors. So Governor Snyder, along with Governor O'Malley of Maryland, are probably the two leading governors in the nation. They are co-chairs of the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices on Cybersecurity, and they are involved in this in numerous ways. I don't really have time to go through all of that today, but just some of the things that we did. The governor launched a cyber initiative about 2.5 years ago. We had a cyber summit that was sold out. We had Secretary Napolitano there. We had Hal Schmidt from the White House. We got too small of a venue because we had for 650 down by Eagle Crest of Eastern Michigan University. And really it was a great event. And then since then, we've had a number of other events, the Cyber Breakfast Series, our Michigan Cyber Summit this last October, where we had about over 700 attendees. We had Israel delegation come in, some international speakers. We've then reciprocated. David Bean and I had a chance to go to Israel and see their cyber tech conference. fascinating stuff. I mean, fascinating, cutting edge. 100 cyber companies in Israel right now. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but in their startup pavilion, they're building a whole city around cybersecurity in the desert in Beersheba. Just fascinating what's going on around the world in this topic and some of the leading edge work. And Michigan is working with those Israeli companies to say, how can we work together to really do some of this? Our cyber toolkit, and notice on the bottom right hand side, I believe we're going to have these slides available to everyone, right? So you guys can see these. If you want to write these web addresses down, you can certainly do that. But Michigan.gov cybersecurity, that's our website. You can see all of this. You can read about our cyber initiative, 17-page document. There's a 4-page version of it. There's an executive summary version, so you can go there. But we have user guides for business, government, school, home, newsletters, awareness program. We just won a big award for our awareness outreach. NASCIO, the National Association of State CIOs, picked us. I'm not going to, we have a whole presentation just on that. That's 15 minutes, but I'll just say this. We have, you say somebody, awareness on cybersecurity. Some of you are probably thinking, come on, this is a decade old. This is 2014. We had an awareness program. It was a complete disaster. I mean, people hated it. They told us it was death by PowerPoint. It was old. It was boring. It was a waste of time. It wasn't updated. It was ugly, okay? What did we decide to do? Throw it away and start over with a blank sheet of paper. We went out. We did a procurement. We selected a company called Security Mentor, and we've gone to brief, interactive, and we use the word fun. Gamification is the name of the game. Little Mario figures running around the airports looking for lost laptops. But helping people understand that these are the places where you're losing them, and this is why it's important. And oh, by the way, changing behaviors. That's what it's really about. It's not just, I took the training, check the box, but how do I change behaviors and actually help me remember? I can't go to an airport now and not think about that stupid Mario guy who lost his laptop at the food court. But knowing where all the places are, they're the top places. How many think you know where the number one place is?
The bus.
The bus, yeah, he's seen this before. They're very good, very good. It is. It's the bus between terminals, or the tram, or the car between terminals. Number one place. But so we've really overhauled our training to all of our employees. This isn't just about the few, the proud, the cyber experts, the pros, and people in this room, but it's about all of our employees and getting them all trained. And that's been a big push of the governor. Top project, NASCIO in 2013 was our rollout, and part of that is our Michigan Cyber Range. I know Joe Adams was going to come, they couldn't make it, but our Michigan Cyber Range we've done with Merit. A lot more about that coming, but just a great program they have where we've been able to train people on, when I was at NSA, the cool place everybody wanted to be was in research, development, test, and evaluation. Everybody wanted to be in RDT&E. Nobody wanted to be in ops, right? Ops is the boring stuff. You want to be in the research side. Well, we don't have that in state government. There really are no separate networks. If somebody comes up with a really hot black box that can save the world, what do? We plug it in the network and see if it works. That can be dangerous, right? Some of you in this room know that. So, having a place where we can test the latest technology, research, development, test, and train our teams as teams, attack, defend, red, blue, etc. That kind of thing is really important, and that's really what we're doing with the Michigan Cyber Range. So that's a really big advancement for us. And then really trying to create an environment where it's really all of us can work together. And I think Oakland, you all get, and we'll talk about this in a few moments, we can work with other universities and others to actually see how can we iron sharpens iron. How can we work together in this space to improve what we're doing? So, as far as enterprise, I just want to real briefly before I dive into what I'm seeing for universities and how we're trying to work with universities around the country and in Michigan. What are some of our hot projects? Some of you say, okay, what are you doing now as an enterprise? One of the big edicts is encrypting sensitive data. And I'll tell you, this may seem kind of obvious, but one of the lessons learned from a big South Carolina breach about 2 years ago was all sensitive data in databases really need to be encrypted. So data at rest, data in motion, big project for us. We're almost complete this project. And also with our vendors as well. It seems kind of obvious, but it's been a big project for us. Awareness training we mentioned. perimeter monitoring tools. Rod's going to talk about flattening our network. He's going to talk about our architecture. But really, next generation, everything is going faster. We just put Outlook in the cloud, Microsoft 365. More and more, we need more bandwidth. We're going from a 1 gig backbone to a 10 gig pipe into the internet. So trying to be able to make sure that we have security tools that can fit into that kind of an architecture that meets those speeds. So expanding 7x24 operations. We have people on call. We have lots of people available and different monitoring being done both internally and remotely from a variety of places around the country. Very close coordination with the MS-ISAC in New York, the U.S. CERT, Department of Homeland Security, the FBI. We work with all of them. But moving our team to a 7x24 SOC has been a big challenge, and we're doing that now, so it's a big project for us. Mobile device management, we use FiberLink, which was just bought by IBM, but basically every phone, smartphone, including a BYOD program we're doing now, Bring Your Own Device to Work, has mobile device management on there. So you can control, the policy on the devices. You can sandbox, we're moving to a sandbox environment for personal side and professional side, but the idea that you can wipe data off the device if it's lost or stolen, those kinds of things need to be enforced. And then an enterprise-wide risk assessment. Rod and I are working together closely to bring in outside experts to say, what are we missing? What do we need to be doing differently? So, with that, I want to just mention a couple other initiatives that may surprise you a little bit. One of the things we've done with Oakland County, a lot of our private sector partners, as you think about cybersecurity, if you've been in this industry for a while, the idea of protecting data has been around for a long time. My early days in NSA, we were talking about encrypting and protecting data and data being stolen, and certainly that's critical. And that's a big part of what businesses care about. But there's another whole piece to this, and that's the critical infrastructure protection. So really not just your social security numbers and your credit card numbers that are in your databases, but really looking at this thing from what if the smart grid went down? What if they attacked, you name critical infrastructure, nuclear facilities, or they attacked, brought down, God forbid, the food supply got contaminated, or those kinds of things. These are big issues because more and more everything is becoming computerized. And state government historically has been very good at emergency management. So we know how to deal with fires, floods, tornadoes, because why? We've been dealing with that for 100 years or more, a couple hundred years. They had floods in Michigan in the 1800s. So because of that, people have had to work with those issues. Cyber emergencies, man-made attacks against our critical infrastructure is a new domain that we need to be prepared for. So this is a whole new set of challenges. We could spend a lot of time talking on this. You can read about the framework. I'm not going to dive into that today. That just got released from NIST. But the president's executive order a year ago was the first time any president has had cybersecurity in their State of the Union address in Washington. But their whole focus was really around what? Critical infrastructure, protecting our nation, our roads, our transportation, our planes from attack. So really this whole plan, you can get a copy of it at michigan.gov cybersecurity, is how do we work with the private sector? Both before an incident, during an incident, and after an incident. What alert levels are there? What triggers an activation? What would be something that we would need to pull together on? Think of it like, how many remember the power outage of 2003? I mean, most of you remember that. That was not created, as far as we know, although there were some viruses in the control room, by a cyber attack, but something like that could have caused a major critical infrastructure outage. So how do we work together with the private sector? That's what this plan is. There's been a lot of meetings, a lot of work. I meet regularly with my counterparts in the private sector on a regular basis from the utilities and other major suppliers in Michigan to talk about these things. Higher ed. So let's dive into the question that you all wanted to talk about, which was really how can we address some of the challenges that universities are facing, and I want to spend the next remainder of my time on this, and certainly I can take questions on any topic during the Q&A. There's going to be a panel for an hour, so not really time at the end right here to answer questions. But there certainly have been equal number of headlines around breaches and problems at universities around the world. Here's a few of them. barrage of cyber attacks, anonymous targets University of Pittsburgh, MI5, which of course is the UK arm of the intelligence community, warns UK universities of cyber attacks on the rise in higher ed, 2 million Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter passwords stolen in a massive hack. CIOs wrestle with cyber threats. So clearly you know this is a problem. So one of the things I was looking at is, what are the issues they're really looking at? Well, certainly it's personal data, social security numbers, financial information, same kinds of things that you see in the private sector. Valuable research material, intellectual property, huge deal. I'm not going to get into nation-state things and start naming countries, but you can just read reports. You know, the theft of intellectual property is some people calling the greatest shift of wealth in this nation's history. Whether you want to go there or not, that's not really the topic of my talk today. But certainly there are countries that would rather hack their way to stealing our intellectual property than actually develop their own intellectual property. So that's a big issue, and certainly there's a lot of great research being done at Michigan universities, including Oakland. Outside other university researches, intellectual property, patents, medical pharmacy research, engineering design, power grid research. Amazing the number of smart grid conferences that are happening around the world today that many of us, I know Phil and I, get invited to, and others. Systems are often difficult to secure. It's an open environment in government. In many cases, people pride themselves on, hey, look what I found, so let me tell you about it. People come up and they give speeches. And that's great. It's an open sharing environment. But if that's intellectual property that's then going to be used to help build small companies, of course, it's a huge challenge of how do you then protect that and get at that data. Student staff using personal devices, multiple system platforms, those are just a few of the items. And then the insider threat, illegal downloads, plagiarism, grade transcript manipulation, ID theft, sale of data. Again, most of these you're familiar with. I don't need to read these all to you. But these are all things, the ethics of the data, beyond just the stealing of the data. What can people do to manipulate processes that maybe have been in place for 100 years? But now with technology, the bottom line is this: trust. Do I really trust that what is being sent to me from Rod is really from Rod? And is that really, maybe it came from Rod, but was it manipulated? Is that the right data? Then, am I the only one that sees that data from Rod? I mean, we could go right down the list, and the trust issues are huge. And they're growing, and they're getting more complex. I saw a demo, a little side note here, I saw a little demo on recently from some colleagues in Washington of what they could do, what they're doing with some drug cartels, if you will, in Mexico even today. You know, literally sending messages and things to people's smartphones that make it look like they came from other smartphones and didn't come from those smartphones, and there was no log and no trace of what they were doing, and it was pretty impressive. I'm like, whoa, that you can do some of this stuff, and you know, it can be used, again, used for good to catch some of these bad guys, but also, which I think it is now, and we just saw some big arrests in Mexico, but also that same stuff can fall into the wrong hands and be used for evil, right? So, you know, just think of the impact on relationships. You get a text from somebody saying something about somebody you know, or making allegations from somebody you trust, but maybe it didn't really come from that person. Maybe it came from somebody else. Think about the implications for relationships. I'm like, oh my God, would my wife see this even? You know, what if? I mean, no, seriously. I mean, it's really a big issue. Thank God we have a great relationship, married 25 years. But somebody could say, you know, send something from somebody that, you know, that wasn't true. And it came from somebody. There's a lot of implications to not just, again, sensitive data or critical infrastructure. Now we're talking about personal relationships. We're talking about your friends and your family. These are big issues. These are really big issues. So, what can you do about it? In the last 5 minutes before I wrap up here now, is you know, just a couple solutions. I'm just going to fly through some of this. This is one of the recent studies that I saw that I really like. I encourage you to go visit it. It's a UK study on what universities need to be doing around cybersecurity. I know there are other studies out there, but this is one of the best I got a chance to look at. Have you all seen this study by the chance? Anybody? Anybody seen this study? No? Good. Well, let's do it. That's great. Highly encourage you to visit it and go see. Again, the link's there. You'll have it. But universities have to develop cyber models that target appropriate and proportionate security controls and vulnerable assets. Ultimately, network security is a responsibility for the whole institution. So there's roles for all of us. There's roles for the students, the faculty, the administration, all the different players have roles in this. I'm just going to fly through some of the things they talk about. They talk about high-risk categories, basically saying, identifying your risks. What does that mean at a very basic level? Not all information, needs to be protected at the same level. Some information is public, it's free, it's open, it's out there, right? And that's what we want. So that's good. But identifying what are those sensitive records, like staff records, student records, financial data, how do you do that? Finding the balance between openness. This is the whole sections of this report. Finding the balance in research and network security. Knowing where it should be open and free and wireless everywhere in every building that everybody can use. And when you need to protect certain things and identifying them and putting them in place. A big one, cultural change. This is the one I see everywhere we go. You talk to the private sector, you hear people say, people process technology, right? People process technology. All business majors and computer majors hear that. And I talk to the experts from the Microsofts and the Googles and the different companies, and they say, 90% of cybersecurity is about the people. It's about, hacking the human, if you will. I mean, trying to get you to click on links. One of the biggest challenges we had in the state recently, real quick story, and we've had 3 of these last year. Spearfish, directed at the state of Michigan. How do they get in? The number one way, Sands will tell you this, Alan Powler, who's a friend of mine, and Sands and others will tell you, 90+%, some people say up to 95% of attacks today start with someone getting the credentials of somebody who shouldn't have the credentials. So in South Carolina, somebody clicked on a link, somebody got the credentials, they then used that, led to a bunch of things. You just heard that with Target, Detroit Pre-Press. If you read the breach they just had a couple days ago in Detroit, somebody got the credentials of somebody clicked on a link. Target, they said it was a third-party supplier, somebody got somebody's credentials, one thing led to another, led to another, led to another, they put malware in the machine, that's the way it happens. In the state's case, 3 times last year, very targeted emails, not pretty, not, banking logos, not, but very quick, short emails. Your SOM account is full. Some of you say, what does SOM mean? Yeah, some of you know. That stands for State of Michigan. Most of you in Oakland would not know. But if you're a Michigan State employee, you know what SOM is. That's internal lingo. This was written by somebody who knew our culture, who knew the words to use, and made it look quick. Hey, we'll take care of it for you. Click here on the link. Boom. That email went to 2,500 people. 166 gave their credentials out in that. Listen. Now, we had to quickly respond, thankfully. We don't believe we had any breaches as a result of that because our team was all over it and they were looking at that. But that's the kind of simple thing. Got through our spam filters. 95% of incoming email in the state government networks is blocked as spam. 95%. This was part of the 5% that got through. So those kind of attacks, training for end users, cultural attacks, knowing your environment, spear phishing is a big challenge for all of us. Teamwork. You can't win this. I say if you try and do cybersecurity, I'm glad you have a club here. Trying to do cybersecurity as a you do cybersecurity as an island, you will fail. You will fail. You have got to work as a team. The bad guys do. They're very good. They know what their strengths and weaknesses are. They work together very effectively. We know that. And there are a lot of case studies of the FBI and others around that. So what I'm saying here is work with your partners. We work with the multi-state ISAC. We work with the counties. We work with the Homeland Security. You got to work as partners. I love the Florida model. Mike Russo's a good friend of mine. He was the state CISO in Florida for many years. He left Florida government, went to Florida State University. He set up a council of cybersecurity for all the universities in Florida. 12 universities. They get together monthly. They share best practices. Guess who's sharing it? Mike Russo. He's a good guy. He's smart. But they're doing it. They didn't have anything 2 years ago. Nothing. That's why I'm encouraged by this group you guys have. Oakland can be leaders in this space. And work with your partners. Yes, there's going to be, I heard the word in Israel a lot, co-opetition. You cooperate, but you also compete. But that's the way it works, just like Valpo and Oakland, right? And we compete in basketball, but we can work together in cybersecurity. So the reality is that that's the model I think that you're going to see a lot of. You got to work as a team. The REN ISAC is the University ISAC. If you don't know what that is, get involved. It's a really good group that you can work with. Here's a website for it. You can get more information, go there. I'm almost out of time. I want to thank you all, and I look forward to the questions you're going to have during the next hour. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Our next speaker is Rodney Davenport. Rodney Davenport is the Chief Technology Officer for the state of Michigan, responsible for IT strategy, vendor management, and innovation. Prior to joining the state, he was employed with DTE Energy, where he focused on innovation and emerging technologies, as well as taking a lead role in Department of Energy research grants, conducting an analysis of smart grid communication protocols. Let's give a warm welcome to Rodney Davenport.
So good morning. I guess it's still morning. So I've got my coffee, and we're going to do Life Unscripted. So I was working on the slides this week, kind of talking about flattening of the networks and whatnot, and part of it was that Dan took all the good slides. Part of it wasn't, it was, I started thinking about the audience, and I thought, okay, so we're at a university, and I thought I would assert speaker privilege and just kind of not talk about what I was asked to talk about what I want to talk about. And I thought, what an opportunity maybe to try to, do a little bit of a classroom-style professorial dissertation with some of my thoughts, right? So I think that's what we're going to do. Hopefully it will be good. It may not be good because, of course, I'm not a professor, and so we're at high risk for this really going off the rails. And speaking of going off the rails, I feel obliged to do a little safe harbor statement. Because I am unscripted, I probably should say that these are my opinions and not necessarily those of the state of Michigan, because we don't really know what's going to come out of my mouth.
A man after my heart.
So I thought, as I was thinking, that security, so there's all the pieces about security that we think about, right? And I think of those as kind of the technology aspects and some of the people process aspects. But there's a bigger, I don't know, let's call it a societal and cultural question around security. And I thought maybe we could dive into that a little bit today. So if you go back to, sort of the nature of the internet, right? We know, well, we have learned, I think, over time that the internet never forgets. And I think we know some of that from, the Facebook photos that we wish would disappear, seem to come back. I think if maybe we did a little Googling, you'd see some Usenet posts from way back in the day where I was talking about, some kind of SMTP question or whatever that I had. And thank goodness it's mostly that, right? I mean, I'm sure if we dig deep enough, there's other things that we don't want to surface. But Napster, I think, was another good example, and people have warned me that some of my references are a little too old school. Like I talk about Michael Jordan a lot, and they're like, no, it's LeBron now. Stop talking about Michael Jordan. So I guess in the same way that maybe it's not Napster anymore, maybe we're ripping Blu-rays and putting them out on BitTorrent sites. But so there's this kind of I don't know, we'll call it like the ethical hacker concept that information wants to be free. And I don't know that information necessarily has any wants, but I think that certainly that represents a philosophical mindset, and it's really more of a as Dan was saying, an academic mindset that as we learn things, we get pleasure from sharing them with like-minded people, and I think that that's really the way that we evolve as a people, is that we build on the collective wisdom of those that have come before us, right? The whole standing on the shoulders of giants things. So there's this trend, and I think it's really predominant in the tech circle, is that there's this impulse to say, hey, I want this information to be out there. I think Eric Raymond from the open source thing, he called it ego boo back in the Linux days, saying, well, the question was, well, why would people devote their free time to coding this open source project when there's no money? Well, it's so that you can gain prestige amongst your peer group, right? And that had some value for people. And then, when Red Hat got bought, I mean, there was some money in it for some people as well. But originally, I think, some of the ethos of the subculture is that you like to display your competence and you are respected for that. And so there's some value there. But technology, like any tool, right, can be used for good, and sometimes it can be used for things that we would say not good. When I was thinking about like the black hat hacker thing, we tend to think of it as criminal activity. But then I thought, well, since it's academic setting, maybe we shouldn't really say it's criminal activity. We should, because one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. So we'll just call it bad actors from our context, right, from our perspective. These are activities that happen that maybe we wish didn't happen or wouldn't happen. And as Dan was saying, there's a lot of things in the news about these breaches, and it seems like the breaches are constant. I'm gonna put this out there just as a test of do we have any geeks in the crowd? So Comixology, anybody know? Anybody know what that? All right, two, cool. So you probably got the email last night saying that there was a breach of Comixology. So the iPad comic book reader system hacked, right? Now they claim no credit cards, but usernames and passwords. The Target thing, the Adobe thing, and it started. So here's my one big philosophical point, right? The first of I think three, if this goes as I had envisioned it. Unscripted, mm-hmm. Is that this whole idea of personally identifiable information. So there's why do we care, right? Why are we concerned about that? I think at the surface there's some obvious reasons, right? Because there's adverse financial impact. So somebody steals your credit card, they run up the bill. We care, but our care is like $50 worth of care because the credit card companies pick that up. But the credit card companies, of course, there's a feedback cycle. There's economic impact. It's not good for the companies, and eventually, I'm sure that will trickle back down to us in some way, right? And then there's the whole identity theft piece. Well, we don't like that because then people can get mortgages in our names, and they ruin our credit histories, and that part's not good. And that's you can recover from that, but it's difficult, it's more of a pain, it takes longer. But I think actually the reason that we're bothered by it goes deeper. I think it starts to tie into our notion of what it means to be ourselves. Another disclaimer, I'm a techie IT guy, and I'm going to venture into kind of a sociology, anthropology area, and for the academics in the crowd, I don't have any sources to cite but me, and obviously that is not authoritative. But we may be able to get some agreement amongst us that these elements of information represent elements of ourselves. And I think that really is what drives some of this emotional reaction to people breaching our data. But if you think about it another way, there's a couple of different categories of information about ourselves, right? There's the kind of the transaction stuff. So you get a credit card number, you get another credit card number. But we all only have one birth date. We have one social security number. Barring witness protection, we have one social security number. We basically have one driver's license number at a time. So all of this, medical history and all of that kind of speaks to who we are, and we want to keep that private. And I think, especially in our Western culture, there's a certain value that's placed on privacy, and I think a lot of that, comes from this idea of self-determination and kind of charting your own course and free association and all the things that some of the governmental theories are built upon. And when that is taken without our permission, we feel that it's kind of that we're personally violated in some way, right? And so there's this desire to guard against that. And I don't want to say guard against it at all cost, but it does come at considerable cost. So security professionals, budding security professionals, there's entire industries around this. There's tools, there's best practices. We really put a lot of effort into kind of strengthening the fortress around what we consider to be precious information. But if we think about this bad actor concept, the good guys, for them to win, they have to never lose, right? The bad actors just need to be successful once. So statistically, we are at quite a disadvantage, right? It's I'm going to make a sports analogy, and I will fail because as an IT guy, I'm not a sports guy, but it's like we have to win every single basketball game from now to eternity just to do okay, right? Just to kind of make sure that the information that we're trying to guard is guarded. Well, the chances are that we're not going to be able to do that. It's unrealistic, it's superhuman to expect that we're going to be able to have that level of quality. And I'll say not our fault, because technology is built on a very complicated and interrelated stack of technologies. At each layer, there's bugs. I don't know if people remember the whole Pentium bug from way back, right? There's a floating point problem. I mean, in the chip itself, there's a problem. So the programmer says, hey, I can't be held responsible for that. It's, it's in the microkernel. We hear about zero-day vulnerabilities in Windows all the time. Even, Linux, I think there was that TLS bug that recently surfaced. So there's problems in all these areas. Not to mention the problems that we sometimes accidentally put into the program code because what we're trying to do is hard and complicated and sometimes never been done before. So there's always going to be ways for people to get to our information. Now, I'm not recommending this because, of course, the Google searches are not private. I at least did the HTTPS to give myself a false sense of security. But I typed in my social security number, I hit the button, and it came up, some website in China. I don't know what it said because it was all Chinese characters, but I did see my number sitting there, and I thought, well, okay, that's out there. I typed in a credit card number, and I thought, well, at least I can get fancy and start putting some percent signs for those last few digits. And I couldn't really get that to work, so I put the whole thing in. That came up, right? I'm like, wow, one of the credit card numbers is out there on some website too. And then I started thinking, well, that's just the stuff that's on Google. I mean, what about the stuff that's in the dark net, right? The Tor sites and the Freenet sites and all the stuff that's super encrypted where the bad guys hang out, the bad actors. So it got me thinking that if this information has been taken once, and because the internet never forgets, that information is taken. It's out there. So I think as a society, and this is kind of meant to be a thought-provoking question, right, because we're at a university, what does that mean? If we say that we have a bunch of breaches that have already happened, and so it's likely that our information has already been taken, and if by some chance we are in the small minority where the information has not been taken, it very likely, almost with 100% certainty, will be taken at some point. So what does that mean about the way we think about ourselves and the way we protect and how we choose to allocate resources if all of our information is now shared, right? If this element of privacy really no longer exists, that some of the power, I think, of information really comes from information disparity, that when they say knowledge is power, it's that person A has a bit of data that person B doesn't have. Well, if we all have the information, right, what does that mean? I don't really have an answer, but I thought it would be something that we can think about. And I think it's important to think about it, and so I guess the overarching theme of my little talk here is that I think it's important to make conscious decisions and conscious responses to what we do and the kind of world that we choose to create and live in, right? I think sometimes that we can make the choices, and sometimes the choices are made for us just because of the circumstances that we find her in, but we still can control our responses, and we can control sort of how we look at that and how we think about it, and where we allocate our precious resources, right? So I think that the kind of the fortress model that we have around the citadel to protect the information, I don't know, we may need to rethink that longer term as we start to think about some of the wider implications of as this information gets shared. Another hopefully interesting thought that I had around information is that the permanent information is the one piece, and then we have this sort of transitory information, right? And I kind of started thinking that information, like money, sort of has a net present value and a future value. So if I know what the price of a stock is going to be tomorrow, that's very valuable. If I know what the stock price was yesterday, less valuable. I mean, maybe good from a historical perspective. If I'm looking to plan the picnic for this week and I'm wondering what the weather's going to be Wednesday or Friday, good. The weather last Wednesday, I mean, since I don't have a time machine, it's not as useful to me, right? So there's this focus on encryption as sort of the silver bullet to, hey, we're going to protect our information with encryption. And I know there's been some controversy with RSA and NSA, and I know we don't want to get into that because it's probably too highly charged. But people have a tendency, again, emotionally to say, well, if I just make bigger and bigger keys, and I'm guilty of this as well. I mean, my open VPN thing, I've got a 4K key. I expire it every 15 minutes so that, when I'm in the coffee shop and I'm checking my Gmail, totally, perfect forward secrecy, no one's ever going to see it. But realistically, the usefulness of information, I think, has a half-life. So we don't so much need to concern ourselves with, well, people sometimes at cocktail parties like to throw out, well, what about quantum computing? What's that going to do to encryption? And I said, well, I guess if they ever perfected it, it invalidates encryption, right? Oh my God, let's think about it. That's horrible. You're now invalidating encryption. Okay, I mean, we're a ways out from that, number one. But number two, realistically, I think it's important to say where and how are we applying our safeguards, and what are we trying to safeguard. So in the same way that some of our our permanent information is now fully public, I think in some other ways our transitory information, we care about it only for certain periods of time. And so I think it's it's up to us, all of us as a people, to say, well, can we make peace with the risk, right? People as a whole, I think, are good, and I think there's a little bit of fact behind that, and that there's more people walking free than are incarcerated, right? Maybe not true in every pocket and every aspect of the world, but certainly over the span of humanity, I mean, there has been more peace and less killings, so that the species can still persist. And so I think a lot of that, the behaviors that we exhibit as humans, kind of translate into the cyberspace. There's not as many people that are trying to get us as are just trying to get their work done. But getting back to the technology as a tool, part of what makes technology effective and useful is that it's a force multiplier of human thought, right? It's still serial, sequential, like people, right? And if you think about traditional crime, you can think about it as the scalability of crime. So you have one bank robber and one bank, and they're only robbing one bank at a time. There's one mugger and there's one victim, and then that happens. And the police force really is kind of designed to fight that, right? Because you have one police person, and they can square off with the bad guys like in the movies. But in the cyber world, you have one person, and they can potentially, hack into the automated check clearinghouse. So now one person is not stealing from one bank; they're stealing from thousands of banks. One person can run a bunch of scripts, find a single common vulnerability, and now thousands, perhaps millions of systems are compromised, right? So it's this this disparity of attack versus defense that I think inherently kind of creates the problem. And I don't know if there's a good solution to this, but I think it really forces us at some point to confront the risk that we are all taking. There's risk in us driving here today. I didn't necessarily think that I was going to be, wiped out by an errant driver or an ice patch, although it could have happened. And, the fact that I'm still alive shows that that has not happened. So a lot of the risk that we assume every day is really more of an unconscious risk. We take them, and in fact, we have to take them because the alternative is untenable. And in the same way, in kind of the cyberspace, I think we are undertaking risks that sometimes we are not conscious of. And I think some of the actions that we take to mitigate and reduce the risk, perhaps good for today, perhaps not so good for tomorrow and the day after. So I'll plant the thought seed amongst us all to say that as we, it's very important to kind of, as Dan said, the steel on steel, sharpening the saw. What do we need to do from a technical perspective, to try to strengthen the security? How can we become better informed? How can we do defense in depth and that sort of thing? Because, we clearly are under, a lot of different types of attacks. But I think also we need to start to think about, well, what, if anything, and how does our approach change if we sort of recognize that the breaches are inevitable, that the nature of the system itself means that I think some of the approaches that we take are really doomed to fail in the longer term, and that we really need to invent, new sorts of ways to respond to this. One thing that I've kind of looked around a little bit, and I've seen some, but not as much information, I think it would probably make kind of a cool research project for somebody, is the human body, right? So the immune system of the human body faces new mutating threats. Viruses are changing, and somehow, and again, I'm a techie guy, not a biologist, but somehow little white cells, they manage to adapt, and most of the time people can recover. So I think if we can take that sort of similar approach in the cyberspace world and say, okay, we need to be, I guess, accepting of the fact that we will have incursion, but then how do we dynamically recognize it and respond and minimize the damage while preserving, the output and the purpose of the IT systems. So I think that that's probably, the next frontier of security challenge, if you will. And in addition to that, I think there's also kind of a societal challenge and a people challenge as well, that we really need to try to somehow make peace with the fact that we are not as safe as we wish we were. And that the bitter truth of it is that, maybe we can't be. But that somehow we need to become comfortable with that, and we need to find ways to dynamically adapt so that, like humanity, we can continue to thrive and survive in the future times. I feel like that was some sort of an awesome conclusion. I checked the time and I'm 1 minute short.
Our final speaker, before we switch over to the panel discussion and before we take an intermission, is going to be Phil Bertolini. Oakland County Executive L. Brooks Patterson appointed Phil Bertolini as Deputy County Executive and CIO for Oakland County in January 2005. Prior to that, he served as Oakland County's Director of IT. He has overseen the development of unique government technology programs such as the G2G Cloud Solutions Initiative and created successful models that can be implemented by other governments interested in improving operations while containing costs. He has promoted the philosophy of build it once, pay for it once, and everybody benefits to many other government agencies, including those within the United States and as far off as Australia and Dubai. Phil Bertolini was recognized by President Obama as a champion of change in 2012. I'm happy to introduce Phil Bertolini.
There we go. First, I want to say thank you to Turpco. Thank you for your work here and for OU to have us. Earlier, you introduced yourself as EMC, and I got hung up with data storage, so I apologize. And Dan's comments, it's always good to go last. Dan's comments that, he doesn't want his wife to see his communications. Well, that's your story, and you're sticking to it. But then I wanted to give Rod a hug, didn't you, afterwards? I mean, that was excellent. So, one, that was awesome. And I appreciate that because something about cybersecurity that we cannot forget is it is people related. We can put all the technology we want in place and still get hit. We can spend millions of dollars and still have someone click on a link that they shouldn't click on. So it's something to think about when we move forward and we think about our cybersecurity plans and what we have to do to our technology infrastructure and what we have to do with our people to really keep ourselves secure. But what I'd like to start with is, really why are we here? And again, Dan had all the good slides, so mine aren't as good as Dan's. But when you talk about the attacks that have gone on, the city of Detroit was just hit because someone clicked on a link or opened an email. You have the whole issue of Target. I was one of those shoppers. And, you run out and you change your PIN numbers on your debit cards and you do all the things that you have to do, and come to find out there were 3 other retailers that were hit before that and no one told us anything. So the information is out there, and then the question is, what do we do about that? Then you have issues like, you see down, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a headline that says, breaking, 2 explosions in the White House and Barack Obama is injured. Someone went out and hacked and changed the headline on a news report. So now we have information that we don't necessarily know if we can trust because people are out there tampering with. Then you have Snowden, who went out there and took all the information from the government. You can decide what your thoughts are in regard to what he did. Someone asked me in a conference, do I think he was a traitor? I think he put people's lives at risk. And if that's the definition of a traitor, then so be it. But those people are out there. And they're taking information. They're hacking into your information. They're defacing your websites. They're doing everything that they can do to be disruptive. Could you imagine if we could harness all that for good instead of evil? The exponential increases in our ability to use technology in this country or in the world would be. But we have those people out there that just want to make it difficult for us. And I don't know, but I still think I'm going to get that $10 million out of Zambibia one of these times. I have a friend of mine who, he's crazy sometimes, but he decided to answer them and said, send me the first $1 million and we'll work on the other 9. I'm thinking it's not good to talk to him. But when you also, and what we're doing in Oakland County is we are the steward of government information, and we do have many different responsibilities. My role as CIO is to do what we can to manage that world And then as Deputy County Executive, I'm also involved very much in the business of government. And when you talk about the business of government, it's very much tied in with your ability to use technologies. There's nothing we do today that doesn't have a technology component with it. And when Brooks Patterson, our county executive, he asked me to be the deputy county executive and the CIO, the reason was he wanted technology at the highest level of the decision-making tree. He wanted, every time we started an initiative at the county, he wants technology sitting at the table saying, all right, what can we do to enable that? And that's a unique way to do business because, and to think about it, government is very much a business. It's a very large business. And when we start putting together those and formulating those strategies on how we're going to use IT, we have to talk about cybersecurity. How do we keep that data safe? You have regulations out there like HIPAA, the Health Information Portability and Accountability Act. And you have those things where you have to keep health data secure or there's penalties associated with it. Well, we happen to have public health at Oakland County and we manage health data. Now what do? We need to be PCI compliant. We have a very robust e-commerce platform where we're dealing with people's money. Hey, they get funny when you start losing their cash. So, and they all, I know they accuse us of losing their cash, but that's not the case. We're government, we're here to help you. But something that you have to remember too is that we have to balance the risk of what we're doing. And that's what we're talking about. We're risk focused because you know what? Someone gave me this great analogy. I won't take credit for it. He said, you could take your computers, you could wrap them up in bubble wrap, throw them in the river, and no one will ever get into them. Well, yeah, that makes sense, but no one will ever use them either. And if we don't build technologies that are as safe as we can make them, and yet still allow us to use them in the world of mobility, in the world of client server, and, we still have mainframe applications that are out there, but how do we make sure that we're still using the technologies to do our job? So you can't lock everything down so tight that you can't use it. And that's what we're doing. We're very risk focused. But there's something in that slide that I wanted to share with you. It's about training too. And I talked at the beginning that security is about the people, and it is about the people. And if we don't train the people inside our organization and outside of our organization in regard to security, we will fail. Another friend of mine gave me an example where he said there was a company, a very high-tech company that had high clearance. And what they did is a company came and took 10 flash drives and dropped them in the parking lot. And then people picked them up, went inside this secure company and plugged them into their PCs. Why? Because they wanted to know what was on them and who lost it. So we're going to be helpful. We're going to give them back. And it was you just got a virus. And that happened in a very high-tech, secure company. You imagine the average government that in many cases is very small and doesn't have a great deal of technology expertise. Who knows what they would do with those? Who knows what security they have in place, what firewalls, what internet detection and penetration tests that they've done? Who knows what they've got out there? But it is about the risk, and we believe that training is one way to lower that risk. Dan gave you an excellent stat. 90 to 95% of all these issues are people related. So now we got to go attack the people. But by the way, how many of you are developers, are going into application development in this room? Okay? You need as much security training as my network and my server people do. Why? So you can build secure code right from the beginning. You don't build it and then I got to go figure out all the problems with it and then go fix it. We should be building it from the foundation and building cybersecurity in. Again, about the risk and about the people. Something else that we're looking at, and you can see it in this diagram here, is you talk about the whole plan, do, check, and act, that circle that goes on. And the reason I wanted to show this is not to give you this eye chart and then give you a test after. It's just to let you know it never ends. It never ends. You're constantly acting, you're planning, you're doing all these things, then you do it, and then you check it. Then you do it, and you check it. And we're going to be doing this forever. Because we have to stay one step ahead if we can, or even if we want to try to. But remember, is that it's an evolution. It's about security is a great foundation to have, but it's going to change. Our attacks today, and what we're seeing today, is very different than what we saw 6 months and 12 months ago. At one time, everybody was saying, it's all about PII, all about that personal data, and they're going to come in and they're going to pluck that personal data out. No, they're not. They're coming in to take the whole database. They're going to take the whole thing and they're going to take it all. And then someone said, well, what are they going to do with it? Well, they've already got your credit card information. So what they're looking to do is take your PII data and match it to your credit card information and steal your identity. They're not going to charge your credit card. They want your identity. And that's what I'm talking about. Well, how do you protect massive databases? Dan talked about the fact that you encrypt at rest and you encrypt data in motion. That was not the case 2 years ago. There are large technology providers that were providing systems for governments and businesses all over the world that did not have that as a philosophy. It's inside your walls. Don't worry about it. Well, now we do, and we have to worry about it. But again, it's a cycle. Something else that we're working on at Oakland County that I think is very pertinent here is you have to have a framework to operate under. When we first started some of our security programs years ago, I remember it was like, throw that, remember when you were a kid you played with Play-Doh? We used to throw it, and it would stick, right? And so you can see how many times you could throw it and make it stick until it didn't do that anymore. Well, security programs early on are like throw it against the wall and see what sticks. Let's put a firewall in. Great. Okay? Let's go ahead and encrypt our emails. Okay, cool. Yeah. But what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to benchmark against? What are you trying to measure against? I'm not a security expert. I stand in front of you as not having a deep background in cybersecurity. My job is to manage cybersecurity. My job is to make sure that we can build it into the organization, build it into the systems that we have, and make it work. I can't afford to throw it against the wall and see if it sticks. So we've chosen the ISO 27000 domains. And then we're using COBIT as a measurement tool against those domains and the controls of those domains. And as you can see on this list, there's a number of things like risk assessment and mitigation. You know why a lot of organizations don't do penetration tests? Anyone want to guess why?
They don't patch.
They don't want to know.
They don't patch? Why else? Someone else said it.
They don't want to know.
They don't want to know. Why don't they want to know?
Because they're afraid if they find out, they'll have to do something.
Yep.
You mean if I figure out I have a problem, I might actually have to fix it?
Isn't that terrible?
Here's the scarier part. What if I can't? What if I find the problem and I don't have the expertise to do anything about it?
You have to hire somebody.
You have to hire somebody if you know what you're looking for. This is what small entities struggle with. And Dan knows this and Rod knows this. We talk about this all the time because there's governments out there that have no IT people and there's servers under a desk.
Yep.
I mean, small companies.
Yep.
There's a lot of small companies that haven't done what they need to do to protect themselves either. So what they're afraid is if I find out I have a problem and I know it, then I have to go fix it. Because if something happens and I didn't go fix it, guess what I am? I'm liable. I'm liable as an organization, and it could cost me millions. I always talk to my folks when they walk into my office and they say, Phil, we got a problem. Which, happens all the time, in organizations, that happens all over the place. And they come in and they say, we have a problem. I say, what's the problem? They tell me the problem. I said, what's the risk? Who's affected by it? What's the potential for data loss? What's the potential? Okay, and it's up here, right? It's high. Go fix it. I mean, pull everybody off of every project they're working on and go fix it. Well, Phil, this problem we've had it for quite some time. Yeah, but I didn't know that. Now I know. You have no choice. Go fix it. This is the posture we have to take in this industry if we're going to do what we can to protect ourselves. And it's about, so these ISO domains. Another one is human resources security. And I talked about dropping the flash drives. I can't tell you. I'm a management by walking around person. And I do a lot with business continuity recovery and business continuity planning for the county as well. So I get to go in and tear apart business process, which is kind of fun. But I also walk by people's monitors and pull the sticky square off with their password. If you want to have some fun, walk through your office and pull the sticky squares off their monitors. Oh, and lift the keyboard tray.
Yep.
That's where their passwords are. Guess what? If I know that, who else knows that? Someone that wants to get in your network. There was a great speaker at one of our digital government summits, and he talked about the fact that how you could get other people's information. And he did one of the scariest things. He showed the video of it. He stood in an airport. Remember this? He stood in an airport and he looked over people's shoulders. And he watched them on their computers. And he took all of their information. Passwords, everything. So I was in the airport the other day. I had to try it. I had to. I tried. I didn't gather the information, but you know what? I saw about 10 laptops, and I could walk up and I plugged my phone in like I was charging my phone. I could have read all of their information right off their laptops, their email passwords, their network passwords, their everything. Think about that next time you're in the airport. But again, you have to. It's about the human. The other pieces I like to highlight is the business continuity management. Something that people don't realize, and in technology, we're really good about saying, hey, we have a great disaster recovery plan. Hey, if a tornado hits this building, I know exactly what to do. Well, we had the blackout in 2003, and it was in August. And I walked into our data center, and I was so proud because our generators kicked in, the air was pumping, computers, the lights were flashing. This was cool. And none of our employees could come to work. I was so proud. It all worked. We didn't lose a single server or even a blip. And what happened is our other buildings didn't have generators. We couldn't have water in the buildings, so we couldn't have people come into work. And then we didn't have a remote mobility platform that they could go ahead and work from home. And by the way, even if they could work from home, they had no power. I watched a guy hook up a generator to a gas pump at his gas station. He had people lined up and down Woodward Avenue in Birmingham. He wasn't gouging anybody. But there was 2 fist fights I watched in line. Because this was 3 in the morning, I was gassing up my car. Because I was stuck in the emergency operations center for 3 days. So I snuck out and got gas in my car. And then we found out that the local communities didn't have enough gas for their patrol cars. So we brought them into the county and we filled up their cars for them. Why? When do you think you're going to have civil unrest?
Yeah.
In a blackout. Well, all this stuff happened, and then you know what? The light bulb went on. Where's our business continuity recovery plan? Technology is only a piece of what we do. We provide services. We have telecommunication services. We have over-the-counter services. We have people that rely on us every day. We have the folks that are of lesser income that rely on our public health nursing to help them with their health care. All those things, and none of that can work if we didn't have power. So we've gone into that business continuity phase of making sure we have BCR plans. How many of you have a fully thought out business continuity recovery plan for your business? There needs to be more hands up in this room when that question gets asked. So something to think about longer term. So cybersecurity, will help you with the technology, and it'll help us not lose data. It may or may not help us keep our business alive. Now something else with the ISO, I love this chart. You don't have to read it. We call it the eyeball chart. But there's a bunch of controls on each of these domains. And what we did is we did a self-assessment where I brought in a security expert and I had them go domain by domain, control by control, and rank us where we were as a county. And we used COBIT as the measurement tool. And when we did that, we said, okay, here's the 10 projects we need to do, or the 5 projects we need to do to enhance our ratings. And then we gave ourselves a time frame. In 270 days, I want to be here. In 360 days, I want to be here. In 2 years, I want to be there. Because remember, it's a moving target. It's not that we don't have cybersecurity. We have it. It's just it's changing, and I have to keep up with it, and our organization has to keep up with it. So we're constantly measuring these things. Measurement's very important, but you have to have a standard and a framework to measure against. Otherwise, it's back to the Play-Doh that you're throwing against the wall. And by the way, that every time you throw that Play-Doh, it costs you money. And if you're spending all that money and it doesn't match up with any kind of framework or design of what you're trying to accomplish, you're in tough sledding. Okay, so cybersecurity, this is something that's very important to me because we're very much into cloud computing and we're very much into the consumption model versus the owning and operating model. And now cybersecurity has come into that world, security as a service. There are companies out there that provide the services for you so you don't have to have the devices on site, you don't have to go buy all the infrastructure you need to buy, and they'll help you manage that. There's nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, and some people would say in government, privatization and outsourcing are dirty words. They're not to us. Well, they're a way that we can lower the cost of providing that service and help ourselves be more secure, we're going to do it. But there's so many things to think about. Should I consume it or should I own it? And these are financial decisions people have to make. Because on the one hand, I can go bond for capital monies and go buy it all. And then I can operate it. On the other hand, if I consume it, it's an operating expense and not a capital expense. In some budgets in higher ed, I know that can be funny in the higher ed world because having a higher operating budget from one year to the next is not a good thing, and the boards don't always like that. But sometimes you have to do that if over the long haul, you're going to be able to save money. Do you have the expertise in-house? I don't know about you, but cybersecurity people are pretty hard to come by. If my sons, I have an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old, and if I could have, when they were younger, I would have taken like an epidural type needle, and I would have infused in them, go into technology and cybersecurity. No, neither one of them. So I didn't do a good job with it. But the whole point is that's where the jobs are. When you talk about careers, we're in a recruitment and retention war right now. The private sector and the public sector, we cannot find the people we need. And the reason we can't find them is because there's not enough of them graduating. There's not enough of them in the workplace. And then the other problem is many of them left this area. So you talk about the economy here. When it went down in 2008, 2009, those that could leave left to find better jobs. Now, come back. And that's what we're talking all over the country. We're talking to people about coming back. Why? Because the economy and the jobs are here now. There's more cybersecurity jobs and technology jobs than people can fill the roles. And that's something to really think about. And then the last thing is, I always put this, when I talk about security as a service, that last question. Are there others out there like me? There's so many people that think they have to go it alone, and you really don't. This is a world today where we collaborate more. The tools allow us that are out there to collaborate more. And as the younger generation comes into the workforce, the millennials, they will be taking leadership positions much faster than the Generation X and Y people will. Simple math. We had the baby boomers, then we had the Generation X and Y in population. There's a huge gap. The baby boomers, 30% of my workforce is going to retire in the next 3 years. And all those jobs are going to become available. And you know what? We don't have enough people to fill them. But then you have the millennials over here. There was higher population growth. You're going to have young people today that are coming out of college that are going to ascend to leadership roles much faster than their predecessors did in the organizations. In government, government, everybody says it's traditional. Whoever's there the longest, they're the leader. Not anymore. We don't have that capability anymore. Much of our middle management and our succession plans all got blown up when people started retiring and then we had a bad economy. So the opportunity for college students today to ascend to roles of leadership much quicker are there. Now the problem we have is longevity. Is most young people today think longevity is 3 to 5 years. We thought it was 20 years. I came from a blue-collar automotive family where my dad was a pattern maker and he did that for 40 years. And my mom was a nurse and they all worked in the same place and they kept doing that. And our goal was to have a career where we could go work for a place and invest in that company, whatever it may be, and grow and retire from there. That's not the case anymore. And this is why, and I don't want to get into a rant over recruiting and retention, but the whole point of this is that you're going to have to start consuming things from other people because you're not going to have the expertise in-house. And there are many others out there like you. And we're going to have to figure out how to work together to make it better. This next one, I just wanted to throw this up here because something to think about as we decide whether it's security as a service or we decide whether we're going to own and operate it. It is very much a layered or onion approach to solving our problem. I went to a company in Washington, D.C. about a week ago, and they talked about the fact that what they do is they try to stop people as they come through the layers. So as they get through the layers from the outside in, you know, if it's easy, it's better if you stop them farther out on the rings, right, when they're first coming in. But if they get too close, it's harder to get them out. That's when the malware and everything starts getting into your networks and so on. So what you're doing is you're constantly putting these layers in place, and you're forcing them to get through there. But one thing we can't lose sight of, as they attack, and then, by the way, there's some companies that actually allow them to attack, and they put them in like a sandbox, and they let them get all the way in, because they want to find out how they did it. So, but I mean, we all don't have that kind of money. This is a multi-billion-dollar organization. But what we have to do is we have to figure out a way to layer in the security. And sometimes we might not be able to put all of those layers in place. And we have to determine the risk by not doing so. Okay? All right. This is really a tough slide. Very complicated. Lots of words. I'm just kidding. But it's everyone's responsibility. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to when we started going to more complex passwords in those days, and when we started making them change them every 45 days. And you know what someone said to me? That's too soon. If it were me, I'd make it change it every week. But they just don't understand. It's everybody's responsibility all the way to the end. So we're training all 4,000 employees at Oakland County in cybersecurity, and I'm going to put them through a year's worth of training through different modules that we have access to, but I want them to take that knowledge home. And the reason I want them to take it home is they've got their kids in their computer, and their spouses, and in my case, my 80-year-old mom, who sends me emails, is this a hoax? Well, one of the things they wanted you to do was send it to me and ask me that. So they can clog up, send it to 10 of your friends. That's one of those prohibitive things, right? So when you have all those people, you need to train them. Why? Because if you're putting that flash drive into your home PC and then you're taking it back to work with all your work, or if you're doing VDI even where you're using a home PC to do a virtual desktop to do your work from home, and you don't have the right security in place, there's a chance there's another doorway for people to come in. It's everyone's responsibility. And I'm also talking all the way to the top of your organization. Our county executive, L. Brooks Patterson, I did the latest security change. And I always write the emails and I send them to him. Because I want to see what his reaction is. And he's an old English teacher, so. But when he sends it back, he says to me, you need to explain more why you're doing it. Because a lot of people think IT just does stuff because they can. I'm going to mess with them. I'm going to make them go through this process because I can. He said, no, it's not because you can, it's because we need to. And the reasons we have to do it. So communication plans that are very important with your cybersecurity program is why you're doing what you're doing. I have elected officials I'm responsible to. I have other people that I have to convince that this is the right thing to do. And it's everyone's responsibility. So my last slide, I thought this was interesting, is what's in it for me? For all of you people out there, what's in it for you? Look at this. By 2017, 1 million jobs are expected to be created in the field of cybersecurity. 1 million jobs in cybersecurity. This is the information we need to get into the elementary schools, and the middle schools, and the high schools. Everybody's talked about STEM education, right? Science, technology, engineering and math, that was it. And then now someone goes, we really should call it STEAM. I heard that in a meeting, because we need the arts. Well, I understand, but pretty soon the acronym is going to be this long. So we need language arts and painting and music, and we need all those things. But understand is that these jobs are real. They're there now. The jobs are here now. This is a forecast of where those jobs are going to go longer term. Every organization needs someone that has the knowledge in cybersecurity and the ability to communicate that through the organization for the betterment of everyone involved. I can't stress how important it is for Oakland University to take that seriously, and that's what you're doing. Turco, that's what you're doing with this group right here, is taking it seriously, that cybersecurity is going to be a big player, and it's huge career opportunities for the people that are involved. So that's what I have, and I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
At this point, we'll take a 10-minute intermission. Please be back in your seats by 11:30 when we'll begin the panel discussion. Enjoyed your refreshments? I'm turning things over to Flavius Papin. Flavius is the president of CyberOU. He has served as an IT specialist with the Army National Guard since 2008 and graduated with distinct honors from the U.S. Army Signal Corps. He will be graduated in April this year with his Bachelor of Science in IT degree from Oakland University. He is recognized by his peers as an expert on cybersecurity and has advised members of the Cybersecurity Club on a range of cybersecurity topics. Welcome, Flavius Papin.
Thank you very much, Turco. As we begin our panel discussion, I would first like to introduce the final member joining us today on the panel. Teresa Rowe is the Chief Information Officer for Oakland University. She is the current coordinator for the EduCause CIO constituent group. She joined Oakland University in 1990 as a senior systems analyst and held several technological positions at the university before being named Assistant Vice President in 2003. Teresa Rowe is also an adjunct associate professor in the School of Engineering and Computer Science. She is especially interested in staff professional development, the building of an IT organization, and team building for successful projects. Personally speaking, Teresa has been a source of inspiration and support for both the officers and members of CyberOU from our earliest days, so thank you very much. All right. And as a reminder, as we're ready to begin the panel discussion, it is scheduled to end at 12:40. This is why we ask that you do not hold on to any questions. If you have any questions or comments, raise your hand and we'll bring Mikey, the rad microphone, over to address them. Eric's got it over there. There will be no Q&A at the end, so once again, please don't hesitate to jump in and say whatever you got to say. Question 1. In Mr. Lorman's slides, it was mentioned that higher education is often a target of cyber attacks. As luck would have it, last month Oakland University issued a notice that several university employees have been victims of tax return fraud. We've been told that no responsible parties have been identified, and there continues to be no evidence of a link between this tax fraud incident and Oakland University. While the investigation is ongoing, our community is wondering, is there any new developments on the tax fraud issue, and was it determined to be the result of technical or social engineering techniques?
That's a great place to start. That is all true. We are experiencing, unfortunately, a number of our employees are experiencing tax fraud. And if you think about those pieces that go into a fraudulent tax return, that's your name, your social security number, your address, and your salary. The sad thing about identity, and if I can talk about this a little bit, each piece of your identity that we talked about today is public in a sense, except your social security number. It's not a depleting resource. If I hold my name and you have my name and someone else gets my name, all of us can have access to my name at the same time. Unlike going shopping and buying something or stealing a good out of the store, if I'm holding it, you're not holding it, right? So our identities have a lot of components that don't deplete. Because of that, it can be very difficult to recognize when something has gone missing. That's a real challenge. Another piece about our identities is that there's no RFID tag on it, or there's no barcode. So I can't trace where identity pieces go the way I can with other goods. So if we think about this, the nature of working at a public university means that our names and our job titles and even our salaries are public information. And a couple of years ago, the state mandated that we put all of our names, job titles, and salaries on public websites. That's all public information. The piece that's not public that we want to track down is Social Security number. And where did it come from and how did people obtain it? You know, we can't find any evidence of a breach here at Oakland University. And a breach has a specific legal term, it has a specific term with insurance agencies. In this case, when these incidents came out, and it's important to understand that when things like this happen, the right legal agencies have to be involved and they control the investigation. In this case, you're talking about the FBI, you're talking about the major lead on this is the Internal Revenue Service and our Oakland University Police Department. They have what information is known. It's not necessarily shared with us because it is an active investigation, and we're not the ones that reported anything because we had no evidence of a breach or a theft or a lost laptop or anything like that. So given that situation, all I can do as a CIO is say, what is the security posture for us here at Oakland University? And today, are we doing everything that we can do to protect data and review those places where our data are stored and try to make sure we're doing everything we can to protect it? At this point, I can't say what has happened or what caused this. Now, you earlier mentioned, I think, Dan, you mentioned the Research and Educational Networking Information Sharing Group, REN ISAC. I happen to be the National Board Chair of REN ISAC right now, and Oakland is a member of REN ISAC. And that's a group of colleges and universities interested in cybersecurity. We band together all across the country, and we are talking about incidents like this, and I can share that Oakland University is not the only university experiencing this situation right now. So collectively, not only is Oakland University working on this, and not only are the legal agencies working on this, but also all of the higher ed security community. What's going on? What happened? How did it happen?
I got a quick question. Right in the microphone. How do you prevent getting, I guess, backlash when it's not your fault, but it's got Oakland University's name on it? Target had the same situation, right? Target organization wasn't the one that was breached, really. It was that merchant's password that, hey, so they had a legitimate password to get in, so it wasn't really Target that was the culpable party. Oakland's not the culpable party here, but you still got to deal with the press. How do you handle a political problem?
Well, we want to be careful about identifying culpability at this point because we simply do not know. There's number one. I think, well, I'm going to look down the aisle here. I think it didn't escape any of us that the Target CIO stepped down from her position this week.
Yeah, and I would say Target, I would disagree with you on the Target discussion. Again, I don't know anything about the Oakland situation, so I don't want to, and I don't know the details of the Target, but if you look at it, somehow that malware got on the end of point of sale devices. So number one, like for example, if the state of Michigan hires a contractor, you know, there's a common saying in government circles, but it's really in the industry, which is you can outsource the function, but you can't outsource the responsibility. So you still are responsible. If that's a contract, if it's a third party, you decide to have somebody else provide that service to you or that box or whatever it is, that technology, that's still part of your enterprise. There's still a lot of questions in the industry. I just came from RSA in San Francisco, a lot of discussion around that very issue. How did it get from the third party who got hacked? And yes, it was a credential. They made that public, and clearly there was a lot of responsibility there. How did that get onto the point of sale devices at all the Target stores around America? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not involved in that case. I don't know the legalities of it. But I think a lot of people say that in that case, Target has assumed responsibility. It is their store, and they've come public. I'm not saying anything that's not public information, where the CEO of the company has gone on national TV and said we're responsible and we're going to make it right. So I don't know that that's the same case Oakland's in. I mean, I don't know what. So you got to be careful with just because it's third party. I think response. It's simple. One other quick thing is the best practice in the industry is get out in front of it as soon as you can. When you know the data, tell people what you know. I think Target made the case, and people criticize them for being a little too slow, but as Phil mentioned, other people may have been hacked and they even haven't revealed it until much later. So I think the main thing is, get out there, get in front of it as much as possible.
And that's tough when you didn't know what happened,
Right.
and so the only way you find out who's involved is when they go and file a police report. It's not like we have a master list of who is involved here. So those are the new challenges I think all of us are facing.
Well, and it's a challenge that it's gonna get worse. I mean, this is just I would say it's just beginning. It's been going on for quite some time, but it's getting a whole lot worse today. And it's not if we're gonna get hit, it's when. And all we can do is put all the controls in place and balance the risk and do everything we have to do, and then in the end, be able to explain what you did. Because they're coming. It's just how they're gonna get in. You could have an angry employee that has perfectly good access to your network and go in and do something crazy and embezzle money or change identities or do whatever, and they're a trusted person in your network. Whose fault is that?
I would argue that it's the IT staff's fault. If you do not trust but verify, then it's on you. The onus is on you. Prime example is myself. My information just got found in a car recently in Florida during a routine traffic stop. And it turned out that information was taken from an employee like you're describing at Blue Cross Blue Shield. With that, she was taking the information off of her computer, printing it, but there was no DLP in place saying that, hey, log every single thing that's going to the printer, and she was just printing people's information and selling it. So the onus is on the IT staff.
Yeah, I think there's I guess in keeping with my larger abstract societal theme for today, I'll just keep rolling with that.
I'll turn the ambient music.
So I think that there's two things. So merging these two points, right? So there's the, hey, what happened, so that we can figure out what happened and try to fix it moving forward. But then our official response is really bounded by laws and liability and financial consequences, and so I think those two things are in a kind of a natural state of tension. So you need to be careful and accurate in what you officially admit to. And to your point, there's a lot that isn't necessarily known, because as the investigation is unfolding, right, you don't want to accidentally have any half-truth surface, because there can be some adverse consequences to that. But then at the same time, I think that information, how did that breach happen, how did it occur, needs to be more widely shared, so that people can say, oh, well, we to Phil's point, there's a lot of people that are in the same boat. There's only so many best practices, and if there's a common weakness in them, it benefits us all to fix it. To your point about the lack of DLP and the information, IT problem for sure, but the difficulty is that we as an industry tend to collect more than we analyze. So there probably are log files that have all that information in them, but you need to somehow separate the information from the noise, the signal from the noise. So there may have been something available to IT to say, oh, this person seems to be printing a lot of information, and that's kind of an outlier, but that somehow has to register in the collective consciousness of the IT organization, and you need to have some sort of a process to take some action. And of all of the literally millions of transactions that happen in IT and all the systems that are talking with one another, it's very challenging to say that you can effectively put together some sort of a process around how you can detect and respond to those things. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it. We should, and I know some of the security event monitoring tools are helping to filter some of that out. But I think it's the core problem really is that there's limited human attention, and there's also limits to what automated systems can be trusted to do, because you don't want a lot of false positives, because that really tends to bog down your efficiency, right? And if people can't get their jobs done, then that's a problem. No, it's used for information being breached. I mean, that's not good for you. Obviously, it's potentially could happen to all of us, but it's not as straightforward of a problem to solve as it might appear.
Well, and let me chime in on that, because I'm going to differ with you a little bit. And the reason being is the person that took the data and sold it is a criminal. Okay? And how do we know that part of her job wasn't to print out information and put it into a paper file that was stored in a secure cabinet in her area? We don't know what her job was. So for someone to say that you could put that kind of tracking, and I understand those tools exist, but to say, oh, she printed 10 times today, maybe she only printed 3 or 10 and she was selling 3. I mean, we really don't know. As far as blame goes, the blame sits directly where it belongs, right on that woman who sold that data from Blue Cross. Now, what happens next is what's important. It's what we do with that information. So now, if we had a person in our organization that was printing out data and selling it, now I have to put a control in place to make sure that we can monitor that, or do the best we can to make sure that never happens again. But to say the IT people were at fault, it's hard, because I'll bet you, and I'm not from Blue Cross, that they probably have a number of legacy systems that have been in place for a very long period of time that may or may not be able to be even monitored in that regard. So one thing is, let's not give the criminal a pass, but second, then learn from it and make sure it doesn't happen again. Because what happened to you is happening to a lot of people, and the hard part is fixing your problem after is much harder than us fixing the problem on the business side, because now you got to deal with the creditors and everybody else that your identity's been stolen and used for.
I got the mic coming. A lot of the questions and statements by the board are about the cycle of fix it, check it, fix it, check it, fix it, check it. And do you ever see possibly next 10 to 15 years the state actually requiring for people who receive funding from the state that they comply with, say, ISO 27000 security standards? Do you believe that will eventually come to pass sooner rather than later, or later rather than sooner?
Sure, I can start with that. So we use a wide variety of requirements now in contracts. That's a really good point. It's a great question. So, for example, in the card industry, PCI, we also use FSMA, and now the latest rendition of that is called FedRAMP. FedRAMP, for those, FSMA stands for Federal Information Security Management Act. And then FedRAMP is a federal program where it actually goes a step further beyond that, because for those who know COVID and ISO, and those are great, and I agree with everything Phil said on that. The problem is, it's kind of like saying, here's the Cyber Bible, now comply. It's a lot in there, and how do you get that down to, and I know some people are going to fight this word because it's a bad word in the industry, which is certify. How do you certify a cloud provider? How do you certify payment card industry? How do you certify? And we know PCI compliant credit card companies still have breaches, right? But still, there is the PCI process. There is the FedRAMP process. And what they've done is they've said, we have all these controls. We have a long list. We have third-party creditors. We're going to come in. We're going to test these cloud providers. We're going to make sure you're cloud, compliant. And if you're not, you can't sell to the federal government after June of this year. So that's a federal reg right now for FedRAMP. So now, is that going to fix all of our issues? Of course not. Is it going to make it a lot better for us? Absolutely. Because otherwise, as we've done in the past, and I'm not going to go into the details, but we've had cases with vendors where we have wording in contracts and says, 8, 10, 12 pages of you will do all these things. And it's legally in there, and we know they violate the contract, and we still are left picking up the pieces of it, right? So now they're going the next step beyond that and saying, yes, that wording will be in contracts. It's in the contracts now. We're constantly upgrading those contract wordings. And then in addition to that, you're going to start seeing, you must be, FedRAMP. And I think using, the wider cultural analogies of my friend here, Rod, I mean, I think this is good in a lot of ways. I mean, we want certified doctors and dentists, and, can anybody go out and become a dentist? Can anybody go out and, you could use lots of examples. So, now is that going to solve it? Is it going to solve all your issues? Is there going to be, just one other quick point on what Phil was just saying. Snowden, I came from an NSA environment. Security is our middle name. I lived in that culture for 14 years, 7 years, 6 years as an NSA employee, 7 years to contract. And the culture there is unbelievable. They used to say, I don't know if this is all totally true, but contracts, I know this is being videotaped, it's on YouTube somewhere, so and be careful what you say here. But, $2 on security for every dollar functionality, and we used to say in government we spend 2 cents on, security for every dollar on functionality. So they spend a lot of money on security. They do polygraphs, they do background checks, they check their people, they've got, all kinds of signs in the hallways, someone is watching you. I mean, they're all around it, and yet you have cases like Snowden, right? And yet you have cases like Pollard and other cases. So I agree with Phil, you're never going to get 100% of the way there. Can you have logs? Can you have audits? Can you have double verification? I signed and Rod's got to verify that I'm authorized, and 2 people watching to approve checks, and yes, all the answers, yes. You can have all that. And we can have contract provisions, and we can mandate it. Sadly, even that is still going to lead to an environment where we're still going to have breaches. And so the question becomes, can we be resilient? Can we recover from that? Sorry.
Well, let me also tag on for a second, because you bring up a very interesting point. What are we requiring from government? Are we requiring this of our partners? And give you a good example. There's systems out there that manage critical infrastructure. And there are companies out there that want to upgrade those systems, and part of their upgrade was to put unprotected PCs on the end of our network with no virus scanning, and then tell us we can't patch them. Sometimes I feel like, a few good men, you want me on that wall, you need me on that wall. You don't want your water getting compromised, right? Well, we said no. And all of a sudden we had to go through a bunch of steps. Well, we got it taken care of. What about the county that can't say no? What about because in Michigan alone, there's 83 counties, many of them very rural. When you leave southeast Michigan, half the population and half the jobs in Michigan are in southeast Michigan. Once you leave, you're in very rural country. And you have county people that may or may not have any IT expertise at all. And what if someone walked in and said, I want to manage your critical infrastructure, and by the way, I'm going to drop these PCs on there, and don't worry, everything will be fine. Then the other problem is, we're all getting connected together. So the state of Michigan has been working with companies to put fiber throughout the state, and we're going to connect all ourselves together. We're connected to about 170 different endpoints through our fiber. And how can I guarantee that each of those endpoints is going to be secure? And so what I can say to them is, guess what? If you're not secure, you're not going to be on there. And I'm going to shut off your law enforcement system. I'm going to shut off your, GIS system. And that's just not going to happen. This is a problem for us, and you bring up a very important problem. We have a tough time certifying, or a tough time making people meet up to certain requirements, because we still have a job to do and provide services. And then there's what we don't know, the people that are sitting out on the end somewhere that have no protection, have all kinds of crazy stuff going on, and it's feeding back through into our networks, which is a problem. So,
if I can just add on to that very quickly, when you look at universities and governments, we have to work together, we have to connect together, but we're often the last place where people want to invest their dollar. And I look around the room, there's a lot of students in here. Are you willing to pay more in tuition so that we can have a stronger security posture? And that's something we deal with at the government level. Are you willing to pay more in taxes so that our government can operate in a secure framework? And if your community says yes, but the community that you connect to says no, what kind of risk are we introducing? These are huge challenges that we have to address on the public front.
and it's incumbent upon us to educate everyone. And I can't say that enough, here we are in higher ed, but
Right.
what I mean is all the stakeholders that are involved in cybersecurity, it starts at the very top of the organization. If the chief executive officer or whomever that may be in whatever company you're in doesn't agree, you're done. I mean, because this expense and this spend is going to be there, and the board of trustees or whatever it may be, they all have to agree that this is going to happen. And sometimes the question is going to get asked, if you want us to invest more, we're going to have to collect more. And is that okay? And I couldn't agree with you more. People aren't necessarily willing to pay more taxes for something like this because they don't even understand it themselves. Now, my favorite tactic I've ever used is when I have to convince our commissioners on what we need to do for cybersecurity. I always ask, how many of your email accounts have been hacked? And half the room raises their hand. I said, that's what we're trying to stop. That's just an example of what we're trying to stop. So it's an education piece as well.
The follow-up question, I guess, was you pointed out that there is sort of legal framework in existence to create a system where you're requiring subsidiary organizations that receive funding from the government to have cybersecurity, but you mentioned there's no way of auditing them. So ultimately, I guess that's the issue, where even if...
No, I didn't say there's no way of auditing them. We can audit them, we do audit them, and you require third-party audits, we require SAS 70 and different things. Historically, that's been updated now. We do have organizations that audit the cloud providers. In fact, one of the things built into FedRAMP was that, it's not just a one-time thing. In the past, we come in and you do a certification, you do a risk assessment, and that's great for today, for March of 2014. What about next year? What about 6 months from now?
Yeah.
So no, FedRAMP and these other programs, and even PCI, because PCI's been raising the bar since 2006. I mean, every year the requirements requirements keep getting harder and harder and harder, and they keep coming in, and we have to get a third-party evaluator, certifier, who comes in and does that. So you can audit. I said the challenge though is what I meant, and maybe if I said you can't audit, you certainly can audit. But does the audit really cover? They're going in and they're saying they're going to audit Amazon.com, Amazon Cloud Services, or they're going to audit. I'm not going to name different vendors, but large vendors, HP, IBM, others, and they're going to go to these huge data center complexes that are small cities, really, and they're going to come out of there and they're going to say, yep. Usually they'll find, a couple dozen or maybe even 100 things, and they'll remediate those, and they'll be good. Is that really mean security? I mean, there's compliance, and there's a whole argument if you read about this in the blog sphere. Does compliance equal security? Many people argue no, it doesn't, and it's not, and it's been proven to fail, a la Target. I mean, Target was PCI compliant, and we had an issue with what? Point-of-sale devices. So, in theory, if compliance with PCI, payment card industry compliance, meant total security, you wouldn't have had a Target breach. So the argument is, yes, you're going to have compliance. I don't think that's going away. You're going to have federal requirements, you're going to have state requirements, you're going to have contracts that say you have to do these things. I'm saying that's going to raise the bar. It's going to say, here's the level that you need to meet to do X, Y, and Z, but that's not going to mean that you're still not going to have breaches a la Snowden, because I don't know anybody, and like I said, I lived in that world for 13 years. I don't know anybody that does security better than NSA. If somebody does, tell me. But I mean, I know they've had breaches, but they spend a lot of money and a lot of time to protect their data, and they still had Snowden happen, right?
That's not just a government problem. I want to make sure we understand that. That's not just a government problem. There's companies, there's industrial espionage going on all over the world where people are stealing trade secrets from companies. And I can't tell you, it's in the billions, I believe it's estimated, that billions of dollars of capital lost when someone goes in and hacks intellectual capital from another company. And if you look, there are countries out there right now, I believe China, they talked about it, had an entire building full of cyber hackers that was supported by the government to go ahead and steal intellectual capital and secrets from the West. Well, there we go.
Yeah. We're going against the PLC.
Yeah.
That was very insightful. Thank you. It's a lot more than the original question.
Was there a question?
Question one.
Oh, that's your question. Do you have any updates?
I do have one thing I would like to kind of throw out, and that is kind of on target. Social engineering. We really didn't hit much on social engineering, but there's a lot of political. The news, the media, how people relate to things. I mean, the news media picks up comments, right? Joe shot Mary, right? That's big time. But Joe stole credit card numbers from somebody else. That doesn't matter. It's target. It's the target when it comes to technical side that gets it. So we really have a little bit of a lack in the social media side. And the other thing is, you guys alluded to it, I think Dan did at the beginning, right? 90% of problems come from end users. 100% of our discussion so far has been from not end users, right? And one of the things that really burns me when I start thinking about this is us as people. You guys as young people, as teenagers, upper teenagers, young adults, whatever, college students, pay attention to what we're doing. I walked into Blockbusters once and wanted to set up an account. You know what they want? Your social security, give information away. Is Blockbuster really going to protect my social security number like they're supposed to? I really doubt it. How about your cell phone companies? I mean, my social security number is so I can pay taxes to the government, right? I mean, I think Michigan has laws too that we're not even supposed to use driver's license for identification, like on checks. And bank, you go into a grocery store, they want to write your driver's license number on the top of your checks. We need to start doing something to start educating people more on not doing that, recognizing, enforcing laws, regulations, and recognizing some of those things. And I know there's more out there, but those are the types of things that I recognize and I see a little bit. And I really don't know how to promote those kinds of things. Maybe your internal user group here can, and maybe some future presentations can start expanding and looking into some of those things, because we really need to, again, start focusing, I think, on educating people and making people think about what they're doing. Again, last comment, we've seen some of that stuff on Facebook, right? I'm on vacation and posting pictures. We learn about this stuff after the fact.
Well, I don't know if you saw the news recently, but there's a criminal out there that was looking at the obituaries, and he was waiting for the spouse of the person that passed away to go to the viewing, and then he was robbing their houses. Young people today, and I'm not going to consider myself old yet. Yeah. I didn't say I was young. But there's this issue with telling everybody everything. And I know that we're in this world because you also have these sunshine people in government, right? The sunshine people, they want us to just give every piece of data we have in government to them. Otherwise, they grade us down. And then we have young people putting stuff on Facebook that, oh my God, I'm glad I didn't have Facebook when I was their age. Because I probably would have put something really stupid out there, but it never goes away. And people that are going on vacation, I love to see vacation pictures, but not while it's happening. You're telling everybody you're away from your home. And these are simple things, but people are getting so used to it, they're willing to give up more. And right now, we are consciously giving away all of our information every time we sign up for something online. And the problem is, I don't know if we can swing the door back the other way. What we can maybe do is say, I personally won't do certain things because of the information they ask online. If there's something they ask online that I'm not comfortable giving up, like my social number, I'm not putting it in. But then I went ahead and I had to register my son for FAFSA, for the financial aid thing, because you have to for merit scholarships. I had to put his social security number in, my social security number, and now and I know the federal government already has it, but I don't know what the connection is between my Wi-Fi or my home PC to the federal government. I just dropped all my personal information online because I had to. And this is the stuff that we're just never going to get away from. Now the question is, what do we do with it? In government, we're talking about what we do with your information, but there are antiquated laws on the books that are requiring us to give out information. Certain things like social numbers are protected by federal law, but there's other pieces of data that they can drop a Freedom of Information Act on me, and I have to give it all away. I have to tell them everything I have in my database that's not considered confidential by law. And it's because it's the right to know sometimes outweighs the right to keep it secret. By the way, there was one other thing too. Wasn't it the ACLU and someone else was involved, and they're trying to fight this issue of FOIA and sunshine laws because they're saying that people are having to give up too much information. There's something
I
else
saw
there.
something about that, yeah.
We'll have to, look at, but you're right. That information's out there. The problem is young people today, with their judgment of what they put out online, you realize it never goes away. Those beer chugging pictures and all that other stuff, that stuff's out there forever. And by the way, employers are looking at it. Because I do. I go out and I check out LinkedIn. I look for them on Facebook. I find out everything I can find out about them before I even interview them. So.
Okay, in light
Wait,
with,
can I add one little comment quickly? One of our biggest challenges is the halo effect around employees, and you get into, well, they want the driver's license number and the check. Once the business has a process in place and you're required to have a certain data access, there's almost a golden aura around an employee. I really need this data, these data elements to do my job, and it's part of my job, and therefore I have access to it. All great, but then you also have this burden of security around it, and that piece often gets forgotten. Some of our biggest risk points are people who have a right to the data, they need it to do their job, their access is authorized, but they aren't taking the adequate protections.
And the reason they have to have it for the job is because we as an organization require it.
Yeah.
And that's where the business process change has to come in place, and you start tightening down who has access to what.
And I interrupted.
oh, no, you're fine. I just wanted to kind of follow on the previous comment. There's been a lot of talk about the kids today, not just the millennials, but the ones following them, are coming into the world with absolutely no comprehension of privacy. So as privacy as a concept disappears from our culture, how are we going to address that in terms of securing our data?
Oh, that's a real problem, but I can tell you, you know what kids aren't doing anymore? Facebook. So you know why? Because we're out there. They don't want to put anything out there. We're out there watching them.
They have their own.
They have their own. You're right.
So, of course I have to respond to that, right? I mean, that's...
I was thinking of you.
Totally up my alley, yeah. And of course I'll try to combine it with your stuff because I like to combine stuff. So I think awareness and education is good. But there's a deeper people problem, right? So we all know that diet and exercise is good for health. And I know we'd all want to raise our hands and say that we're on the treadmill 3 days a week for at least 20 minutes, but I'd venture to say that most of us maybe are not. So even though we may know that things are good, and cyber hygiene is important, there's something about people that we just don't, we don't seem to want to comply so much with what's good for us. You've got the SANS Top 20 and the OWASP, and I think that, there's different statistics, but that takes out a big chunk of security vulnerability, and yet, people don't often regularly do it. To Dan's earlier point, compliance, I think, is useful, maybe necessary but not sufficient to fully, try to increase your security posture. I think Australia is, they philosophically kind of moved to this risk-based approach, and it's less about compliance. And there's kind of a, some dueling schools of thought on how best to approach it. But to your point about the and I don't know what we call the post-millennials. We'll make up a name. I don't know, we'll call them like the digital born.
Digital disruptors.
Okay. that maybe the concept of privacy as we have known it disappears, and maybe that's okay, right? Because each generation sort of does their own thing, and it's interesting. Now, I mean, I can come up with a lot of scenarios that is maybe corrosive to individual liberties, but then maybe something else gets birthed out of that we don't quite know. And I guess the deeper thing is I don't know if anything necessarily can be done, right? We can talk to them about lessons of history. Speaking for myself, I remember sitting in history class and trying to learn and abstract the lessons of history, and yet I continued to sometimes make the same mistakes over and over. So people are complex. I mean, a friend of mine from school said, I went into IT because I hate people. And I don't know that I necessarily hated people per se, but I have an appreciation that people are sometimes unpredictable and nonlinear and illogical, and it's there's a certain comfort in IT and that it's more of a deterministic system. But people will do what people are going to do, and I'm not sure that it's possible to, really try to force changes if there's a sea change afoot. So I guess maybe we're just left to sort of, as the older generations always have before us, kind of ride the wave of change and see where it goes.
I'm going to say, jump in here real quick. I'm going to disagree with Rod on this. What? I just came from RSA, and I went to like 4 sessions on privacy. I went to a lot of the privacy sessions. It was fascinating. Some of the leading privacy experts in the country in San Francisco. And they believe, and time will tell, that the pendulum's going to swing back. That it's gone too far. Kind of the Facebook thing may be fading, but that the implications beyond the pictures and the beer drinking or whatever, beyond the Facebook pictures, that people are going to start seeing the deep implications. It was some really funny speakers, a bunch of people that they called themselves reformed security professionals, and now they've gone over to the light. The dark side was the hacker, the cyber guys, and now they were privacy, chief privacy officers for some of the biggest companies in the country. I mean, so these are not, I'm talking, name the top Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies. And they were saying they believe that ultimately, there's a trend. I saw it in security. I've been a security professional most of my life. Even the private people in state government, they like to see the word security in their job description, or cyber. It's kind of cool. It's like they couldn't get any traction on I'm a privacy professional. It's like, okay, we can stand out in the hallway. It's almost like you're not part of the hacker, black hat crowd or whatever. But their view is that privacy, and it was just fascinating to listen to these panels, and I don't want belabor this point because these are all like an hour long, 4 of these panels, it gets long. But they were saying things like, compliance has failed us. Standards have failed us. Laws have failed us. The breaches are happening all around us. Making it illegal has not stopped breaches, has not made, is what we need is, a cultural rising up of this data is important to me, and I want people to do something about it. So whether or not that pendulum will swing or not, I don't know. I can't predict. I mean, I'm just telling you, that's what I heard out at RSA. That's the disagreement part. It may be that there is no, that privacy is totally redefined 20 years from now, 10 years from now, or it may swing back. I'll give you one analogy. When I joined state government, just real quick, in the security field, I mean, it was a joke. I came from England, and it's very much, barbed wire fences and German shepherds and guns, and, it was like security, right? And I came into state government in '97. You could walk into the buildings. There was no security. The big thing, there were signs all over the walls. You could walk into the buildings. The sign said, "Watch your purses." That was the security. Why? Because a bunch of purses had disappeared from the second floor of the CAS building. These people were walking in off the streets, walking up to the second floor, stealing purses and walking out. That was the security in 1997 in state government. There was no security. No guards, no nothing. What happened? Who could tell me what happened?
9/11?
9/11 happened.
Yeah.
What happened after 9/11?
Metal detectors.
Guards, guns, multiple guards,
100-foot
rings of guards around buildings.
Full body
Cameras
scan.
everywhere.
Full body, a total different world after 9/11, right? I mean, again, I'm not saying there's going to be a privacy 9/11, but that was kind of where these panels were at RSA. I don't know what a privacy 9/11 looks like. Maybe somebody in the audience can tell me, but maybe there is one. I don't know. So I don't know the future. I agree that one scenario is maybe privacy, that maybe there is no more privacy in the future. Maybe we redefine it. Or maybe something dramatic happens, and 5 years from now we look at this whole thing differently, I hope. I'm not asking for another 9/11, please, but we don't know the future. So I'm not, they were predicting there's going to be a pendulum swing back, and that people are going to want their privacy back. So we'll see.
I think the only data that people don't have today is of the unborn. I truly believe that the data that's out there has somehow been compromised. Look at Target alone was 100 million. 100 million records. So for us to say that You know, and maybe they're going to have to change the numbering system or something. Maybe they change Social Security. I don't know, but something's got to happen because I think they're just gobbling all this data up. Now the key though is, do they know what to do with it after they have it, and have they mashed it together to find something? Your issue that you were talking about earlier, someone mashed data together to get that to happen. They got that stuff online, and then they found another source for social numbers or something, and they put 2 and 2 together and stole the identity. That's going to be the piece. They're just taking lumps of data and they're trying to figure it out. But I don't know. I just don't know how we swing back now. I don't know how we close the door.
I totally agree with you, Phil. I don't know how we close the door, and I mean, and that goes back to where I started. You have this data element. Well, did it come from this breach or this exposure or this stuff? You can't link the exposure of this particular data element any longer to a particular event, and that's becoming problematic. What we have to do as a culture is control the usability of these elements. We could create another whole infrastructure and new numbers, which would then become exposed. We have to get better on the usability side. If that Social Security number could only be used in certain and specific controlled ways, we would change the posture.
I'm gonna agree with Dan and disagree with him at the same time because I have to have the last word. I can't not.
There's some competition going on.
No, trust me, there is something going on.
We're friends.
Yeah, we're co-opeters or something. I think that the pendulum likely will swing back, right? And I think we've seen that through history, and I think we've also seen it in art, right? So I think that movements in art tend to be reactions against the art that has come before. But I think that the privacy thing likely will remain intact for that generational cohort. So, you know, if you look at the culture of the 60s and those values, and then, you know, as they had children, we had the 80s greed is good thing, because there was kind of this little, you know, opposition, and then, you know, as they had kids, you know, we're kind of the millennials loving everybody again. So, you know, but I think that tends to, you know, largely stay intact, and except for the norming function, I guess, of aging, where people get less intense and less extreme in their beliefs, and you sort of, you know, kind of come to the middle. But so whatever we call them, the disruptive, you know, digital borns, likely will retain this. I'm not really sure what privacy is, and then their children will say, "Whoa, I have to react against that," and now we're going to have tinfoil hats, and everything's going to be all, you know, hyper encrypted. But how those generations interact with each other, I think, is maybe where we don't exactly know, because because they will be a large part of society, and they'll be in positions of influence and leadership that will probably have a disproportionate effect on how the rest of us sort of experience our lives, and that's where I'm not sure that the door can be closed, but it'll be interesting to see the interaction anyway.
I'll make one kind of bold. I'm not. Ding ding. No, I'm sorry. Last one here quickly. I do think in the next decade, thought-provoking, you're going to see, in my view, you're going to see a big change in how we deal with Social Security numbers and credit cards. I don't think the idea that you're going to have this Social Security number that you just walk around and you walk in a Blockbuster and you give them your Social Security card and they're going to give you credit or whatever. I think that model's changing. I think the credit card that you call up and you read the number and what's your expiration date, I will be shocked if 10 years from now we think of that.
They're already changing to use pins instead of signatures. Signatures are out.
I think that's the opening salvo. I think that's October 15. You're going to see the pin and the chip, which is the European standard and all that. But I honestly believe we're going to see much more than that. And I think you're going to see, Facebook is 10 years old, people. I mean, social media is not much older than that. And 20 years ago, there was no mobile and there was no cloud, right? So I mean, a lot can change in the next decade or two, and I think we're going to look at these numbers differently in the future.
Thank you. That's a lot of insight.
I like the way you said it.
I have a question as far as higher ed, so this is probably more Teresa. As we're analyzing the breaches, are we seeing any threat agents going for the higher ed management systems like DataTel, or are they don't really have that information in higher ed yet?
If you look at the protection of systems in higher ed, the enterprise level systems, and I'm sure that's true for government too, the enterprise systems are the most protected systems, and you know, it takes a lot of effort to try to break into those systems, so we're not seeing that kind of breach. But what's a lot easier in higher ed, honestly, is to download data out of the enterprise system because, well, you're a faculty member and you need a grade book, or you're running reports on things, and it's the downloads to the local devices that become the easiest hack points. That, you know, all you have to do is send an email to somebody and say your email account is near full and give me your ID and password, and I can log into everything you have. I'm not going to spend hours and hours and hours trying to break firewalls and everything on an ERP. It's social engineering is a far easier way to go. The edge devices, if you think about it, that we've moved from an ERP environment, which was a closed box, and the box was put behind, it was put in a locked cage with a lot of firewalls and a lot of protections. And we've moved to an environment where there are multiple orbits going on. You've got data in orbit moving from ERPs to laptops to mobile smartphones and tablets, and so the data are in motion, moving among all of these. The devices themselves are in motion, moving around and joining multiple networks. And the person carrying these things is moving around, right? So you've got multiple orbits that no longer fit into a locked cage of protection. If you're going to hack into something, you're going to look for something in orbit, and that's a lot easier. That's my thought.
Well, you know, one of the larger breaches in our history with the Veterans Administration was not a hack of an enterprise system. It was someone downloaded a bunch of data onto their laptop and lost their laptop. I mean, that's common. And people that get their laptop stolen out of their car. What data are they keeping on? You get your phone stolen. How many people don't have a passcode on your phone? And we're a pretty smart crowd. There's a lot of people that don't. There's a lot of people that don't put a passcode on their phone because it's too hard to get into when they want to get into it.
Or I don't encrypt my laptop because that's too much overhead.
Yeah.
Or put antivirus on your phone or encrypt your phone. It's crazy.
Going to skip a few questions and go out of order.
We messed up this program.
Your job as the moderator is either incredibly easy or incredibly difficult because the panel will talk for 8 solid hours of its own accord.
Well, it's easy to sit here. It's hard to try to interrupt.
One more question in front row here.
I'm sorry. I've got a lot of questions, and so I'm trying to pick one that I think will be good. And I don't want to get everything off on a sidetrack because I know it'll be contentious, but talking about privacy and being worried about a Blockbuster needing my social security number and everything out on Facebook that now you'd be able to find with a Google search and potentially archive, we're worried about that. But I am concerned about the balance between government programs and the NSA working on implementing security while also maintaining privacy.
Sure. Well, I'm not an NSA official for the YouTube video. So I'm a state government employee, so I can't speak for the federal government. I think there's the on the record official answer is they're investigating what is the right role, with that. And right now in Washington, I know there's a lot of bills out there in the House and the Senate with the president. They're trying to figure out what is the role for NSA, how far can big data go, how far can it reach into our lives. I think those are very valid questions, and one of the points I make to colleagues, I get asked about Snowden all the time. I think he did break the law. I agree that I think that, he did cause harm. The end result may be some good things, but the ends don't justify the means in my mind. That's kind of where I'm at personally. That's not the state of Michigan, that's Dan Lorman, but I guess I'd say 2 other things. I do believe that this is a scary trend, not just with the government, but I think it's even more with the big IT companies, because they have our data, the Facebooks, the Microsofts, the Googles, the Apples. They've got our data. How will they use it? And I really like the analogy in war. They say, capabilities can take decades but intentions can change overnight. And what they mean by that, and the famous general said that, if I want to build an aircraft carrier and I decide that's a good idea, you may say it's a bad idea, but it could take me 20 years to build that, or to gain the technology to build that. But how I use that today could be for X and tomorrow could be for Y. And the same thing goes with privacy. So even though they're using it for a certain purpose today, how will they use that tomorrow? Could that be used in a different method? Could the intentions change in the future? And I worry about that with my kids. I worry about that with social media and privacy and what data is out there and how that data could be used. One trend that I'm seeing a lot in Washington and Silicon Valley as I talk to companies is, really gets back to the question of trust. Who do you really trust with your data? Do you have trust repositories? Do you give all your trust to all the different companies, or do you have a certain group of companies or company that you trust and you see the internet through that lens? Some people think that is a problem because it's kind of like censoring or filtering, but maybe that's, do I really want to give all of my data to all these companies? And how are they really sharing it, and who do I really trust to keep my data safe? Those are all big questions. There are hundreds of great editorials in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post on this. Obviously, we're not going to resolve that today, but I agree with you. These are huge issues. I think the country is struggling with that. I think the big IT companies in the world are really struggling with that today.
So was your question around like the proper limitations of government, or what? Because I've got 4 or 5 speeches ready to go. I just want to make sure I'm getting the right one.
Well, it was partly that, but it's kind of like, well, in some sense, we're glad to give away personal information for a nice product. Like, I mean, how many of us have Android phones, right? But then there's also that role of government, and it is a balancing act, but it's like, if we are, for example, tapping fiber lines and saving as much as we can, is that a good idea? Is that a bad idea? Do we put protections in place to try and preserve privacy while keeping the capability? But, as state of Michigan and county executives, there's not too much there, I guess, you're involved in. But it's something to think about.
Yeah, right. I mean, not from a federal level, but it's an interesting philosophical question anyway. So, and I won't get the attribution right. I'm going to mangle the quote, but someone from U.S. history once said that people who trade liberty for safety deserve neither. Something along those lines. I think it's complex, right? So, government being for the people. I think that there's a reasonable expectation that trading that information is relatively safe. To Dan's point, we're sort of doing both, and it seems like we have an interesting dynamic balance between big business and necessarily large government, so that they can sort of keep each other honest. But there are, and I'll say most of it is unintended consequences, right? So as people try to do more to do the right thing, strange things happen that aren't good. If you could create a system to say, well, if the government were able to tap every line and have perfect information and able to perfectly analyze that, that would be good, right? Because it would increase our safety, but then at the same time you get in this strange Minority Report thought crime thing as you take that to its natural conclusion. So I think that there's no other choice except to let that evolve sort of through the process. So as many voices are heard and as these kind of ideas collide, it will slowly, kind of find its middle ground. And to Dan's point, when we have these inflection points like a 9/11, that tends to bring sharp correction, which then dampens out over time. So it's governmentally, are we sensitive to that? Yes. And at the same time, we also want to try to provide optimal services to citizens, and sometimes to do that, you can do it better and more effectively if you have more information, right?
Well,
so it's.
But you can't have your cake and eat it too, and this is something that they all talk about. That everybody was watching during the elections to wait for another terrorist attack, and everybody was watching the Sochi Olympics and seeing if the terrorists were going to do a bombing and blame Putin for what might happen there. You can't have it both ways. If people want the government to protect them, then you're going to have to give them the data to allow them to protect you. If you don't want the government's protection, then you can say, hey, then don't collect any data about me. But when the bomb hits or something happens, then don't blame the government. See, this is the vicious circle we're in. We don't know where the line is that we're willing to cross. And in other parts of the world, they've crossed those lines. And they've done things. And if you go to Israel, and you were just there, you go to Israel, right after 9/11, we had an Israeli general come talk to us. And he talked about how we needed to protect ourselves. And here's the mindset there. They had 2 Israeli soldiers that were outside a nightclub. And there were like 100 people in line at the nightclub. And a car bomber drove up. And the Israeli military started trying to execute the people in the car. I don't know if I have the story 100% right. But the bomb goes, and they said, well, what are you doing? They said, well, if the bomb goes off, we only lose 100 people instead of the 700 people that are inside the club. I mean, that's their mindset. So if we think when we talk about civil liberties and information, they're trying to protect their people from getting murdered by a terrorist. So then comes 9/11, right? We never, you talk about airports. Go in an airport in Europe, right? And they're all standing there with submachine guns, and the soldiers are all through the airport, and they're there to protect you. And some people say, well, that's just wrong. Why are there soldiers in the airport carrying
Schwartz, a 26-year-old innovator and activist. Aaron faced multiple felony charges, up to 35 years in prison, for what amounted to an act of civil disobedience. His crime was attempting to make publicly funded journals from MIT freely available to the public, and in doing so, was arrested and prosecuted. As a result, a bill appropriately titled Aaron's Law has been drafted in hopes of amending some of CAFA's inadequacies. Aaron's Law attempts to exclude criminal penalties for terms of service violations, criminal penalties for circumvention techniques that protect privacy and promote security, and to make penalties proportionate to the offenses. My question to the panel is, do you believe CAFA, in its current form, suffices to address present-day instances of computer crime?
When was it enacted again?
1986.
I'm guessing no. How can we have a law that was generated in 1986 that probably hasn't been amended a lot?
It's been amended. I can get the date on that, particularly for the Patriot Act. It's been amended in 1994. It's been amended, but it's still far from...
Was it amended in 2013?
No, nowhere near.
Our world has shifted so much, and we should, I don't know the ins and outs of CAFA, and I couldn't even explain, and the instance that you're talking about is horrible, that someone would take their life over that. I mean, that's a horrible thing. But when you look at it from a law perspective, this thing is changing so fast on us. The world is changing so fast in cybersecurity that I don't know how any law that wasn't enacted today could cover what's going on. Because remember, at the time it was enacted, it was only covering what they knew at the time.
Right.
And even then, we know they didn't know everything. So that's the problem I have. So I'm not familiar with the act, but all I know is anybody that thinks that there's a cybersecurity law that's on the books that wasn't taken care of recently, then I don't think it has the chutzpah to deal with what we're dealing with today. That's just my opinion.
Any experiences with court cases in Michigan having CAFA brought into the mix, outcomes?
We haven't, I'm not familiar with, we use a number of other laws. The Social Security Privacy Act of 2004 is one of the most common ones that comes up. I would agree with Phil that, there's a number of changes. I know there's a lot of contemplated changes, both in Michigan and at a national level. What you tend to have, just in general, just for the audience's benefit, what I see a lot, I'm not a lawyer, so right up front, so the lawyer line.
Neither am I.
It depends, right? And that's the typical line every lawyer gives you. It depends. But the reality is that a lot of the high tech companies tend to not like every state enacting laws. You want to get a national law, federal law, because otherwise they've got to do 50 different things in 50 different states. And so you tend to have the question of, breach notification is a big one hot in Washington right now. But I would agree that we need updates. I think there's a number of groups. I know that I'm going to meeting into this month where we're talking about model legislation, both within states, and then how do we work with the federal government around this. The wider question, not just CAFA, but other for computer crime, but just the wider cybersecurity legislation. There's a lot of different bills floating around. Every year there's predictions about what's going to pass or not going to pass, what the president's going to sign or not going to sign. But I certainly agree with Phil. We need updates to the crime. It's going to be constantly updating crime laws.
So this is a great question because I think you've stumped the panel. I don't know that any of us are experts in CAFA, but so I think that laws necessarily tend to lag, behavior, and especially in an area that evolves as quickly as IT. The other challenge is that it's necessarily deeply technical, and not all lawmakers, have a deeply technical background, right? So that there's a lot of education that has to take place there, and so I think that tends to slow the rate of change as well, because it's a lot of information for people that don't have a background in it to assimilate. And the Aaron Rodgers thing is. Darren Schwartz, sorry. I don't know how much blame can really, be directly tied to that. I mean, certainly he fell into some bad circumstances, but and that's certainly not good. But I know that he was a young pioneer in a lot of the kind of that open source movement. Sometimes bad things happen for bad reasons, but certainly if you were to say, copyright equals the cost of someone's life, I think we would all agree that that's a disproportionate penalty, right? And, there's been some, dialogues even in other things like, drug laws. So, the kind of that zero tolerance minimum sentencing for drugs, there's debates on both sides of that, in society. So I think that this is just sort of a subset of a larger thing that tends to manifest in the way that society governs itself. And, to Phil's point, as this starts to become more of a mature industry, and that may take another 20 years because it's still relatively young, and a lot more case law will be established and a lot more norms will be formed around this. I think that this will get better over time, but certainly in the short run it's a contentious thing.
I want to add one piece to this. I look around the room and I see some immensely bright and talented students who really, really understand technology. How many of you consider a career in politics, running for public office? Great. I'm glad to see that. We would really encourage you to run for those positions where you can influence the legal system. You can be part of the group that's writing laws correctly and intelligently so that they apply to these situations appropriately. And if you don't want to run for office, and I understand a lot of us really are more comfortable sitting behind a screen, being involved with your local legislature, writing letters, interpreting technology for the political system, that's a role you can play, and we certainly need your voices.
I don't know if you all remember, but it was just a few years ago that some people were canoeing down a river, and they swore at a woman on a canoe, and they were tried for that. There are laws, and I don't know if they still call them blue laws, but there's a lot of laws that are on the books that have been there for a very long period of time that make a number of things illegal. And I think this is what this next generation needs to do. I couldn't agree more. Get involved and start making change, because it's got to happen. Someone's got to take the ball and run with it. And sometimes people get comfortable with where they are, and it takes that next generation to stir the pot. So I'm excited about our future. I'm excited about our future because of the people sitting in this room. This is good stuff.
I believe there's...
For a question about security activism, which sounds sort of like what we're talking about, where a person needs to be involved if they want to influence the security world, what about the economic ramifications of that, where working in public office might earn you, let's say, tops $185,000 a year at the state level, but if you work with a Fortune 500 company, you could be earning into the tens of millions. So ultimately, you have to question the motivation of how much is it at your heart to want to influence policies when you could be getting filthy rich.
Well, yeah, public service is a calling. Public service is a calling. I've been a public servant for 26 years. I've had all kinds of opportunities to move on and go to the private sector, and I haven't chosen to do so. Not because I'm secure in my job. I stir the pot more than anybody in my office does. And the reason being is I believe it's noble to want to help other people. And if you think what government is a service industry that helps other people and provides services for them. Everybody doesn't like to pay their taxes. You know, I used to be the tax assessor for the county, so I get it. And I didn't get any Christmas cards, no thank you notes. But understand is that the taxes are what funds the services. If you want police on the streets and you want the fire department to come when you call, you want, you know, water, you want sewer, you want all the things that you have to have, somebody's got to pay for that. And so there's all this infrastructure around doing good for other people. We have 1.2 million people in Oakland County. And every time we do a project, we talk about what impact our project's going to have on those 1.2 million people. Because that's what we're there for. We're there to help them and provide services. So when it comes to money, you know, they've done a bunch of surveys where people say that the money's not the top reason young people want jobs. The surveys coming out of college today is that it's that because they care and they want to be part of something is number one. Then money comes in a very close second. I agree, you know, jobs are a means to an end, but I can't tell you the rewards that you get when you do get the letter, the handwritten letter from the senior citizen that says thank you for doing X. Or you have the young person that comes to Youth in Government Day and they get something out of it and potentially they seek a career in public service or something like that. Those are the rewards that we get that I think far outweigh the money.
And I just want to add two things that I agree with everything Phil just said. Two more points. One, I don't think it's one or the other necessarily. I mean, some of us have been in government a long time. Rod was in the private sector. I was in the private sector for 7 years. Opportunities to go back and forth. You're seeing in Washington right now, especially, a lot of opportunity. More and more people on loan from the private sector in the government. People who take a stint in the government. A lot of the leadership and technology come in. Some of that's, you know, partisan, but some of it's not. It's just, you know, they come in, they do a service for 5 or 8 years or 6 years. In many cases, for the big consulting firms, it's viewed as a good career move. And the second point I would add is that think of it almost like lawyers do. I mean, the example I've used to people is when people a lawyer comes out of college, a lot of them have choices. Do they want to join a law firm, maybe make more money? And some of them choose to go to the district attorney's office, or they decide to go to become prosecutors, and they're in court a lot faster. So they're getting, you know, and that's a decision that's been made for decades, right? And Phil probably knows more about this than I do, but the reality is they get a lot of hands-on experience a lot quicker, and maybe they get an opportunity to become a CIO quicker, maybe move up the chain, a senior engineer, a senior executive, and then maybe make the jump to the private sector. So I think there's a variety of different career paths you can use with public service as part of that career path that isn't one or the other, it could be both.
Thank you.
It's about the people. So let's not lose sight of this. It's not a technology discussion we're having here. It's about people. And if you enjoy working with people and you enjoy the effect you can have on people, then public service is a wonderful way to go. Because I love getting up in the morning and going to my job. I love what I do, and I consider that to be way more important than going out into the private sector and getting more money.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time for the panel discussion, so I'll now be turning it over to Tripco for the closing ceremony.
Thank you, Flavius. We did have some other great questions we would have gotten to, but
we got through 2 of them.
We ran over time. Flavius can give you a preview of them, though, and I don't know, maybe during lunch you guys could harass him a little bit and get the answers from him. So I'd like to thank all of you for coming out here today. This event wouldn't have been possible without you. I'd like to thank all our speakers and panelists, and I'd like you all to step forward. We have a little token of appreciation for you guys coming out here today.
Thank you.